Drage obiskovalke, cenjeni obiskovalci, dobrodošli na mednarodnem forumu Mobilnost za ustvarjalnost. Motovila v sodelovanju s 𝗀𝗲𝗲𝗶𝗴 domom, s touring artist, on the move, 𝗀𝗲𝗲𝗶 in drugimi partnerji, gosti domače in tuje strokovnjake, s katerimi bomo razpravljali o trajnostni in pravični mobilnosti v kulturi. Seveda bomo poleg zbranih v dvorani 𝗀𝗲𝗶𝗴 v 𝗀𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗃 domu pozdravili tudi občinstvo, ki se nam je pridružilo preko streama na spletu. Pa dajmo en tak spodbuden aplavz ob začetku čudovitega dogodka, ki nas čaka. Dear guests and visitors, we are glad to welcome you at the International Mobility for Creativity Forum. In cooperation with partners, 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 dom, touring artists, On the Move, Creative Europe Desk Hungary, and other partners, Motovila is organizing an event on sustainable and inclusive mobility in culture. The event brings together national and international speakers to discuss strategies, approaches, and good practices at policy level, as well as in the cultural and creative sectors, including film industry. I got the information that the majority of participants arrived today with a bicycle. Is that true? You can raise your hands. Oh, wow. Anybody with a train? Well, somehow. And who was a bad guy? Okay. Nice to know. And of course, European Mobility Week, this year from 16th to 22nd of September, with annual theme Save Energy, is actually a perfect opportunity to change your habits. That also includes me. And before we start with our rich program, you of course know that we will have a lot of lectures and panels. It is of course appropriate to hear an opening speech from the host. Therefore, I will invite Dr. Sonja Kralj, Delegated Head of the European Affairs and International Cooperation Service at the Ministry of Culture, and the Director of Motovila and Head of Creative Europe Desk Slovenia, Mateja Lazar. Please give them a huge round of applause.
Dobro jutro, lepo pozdravljeni, and of course welcome our dear international guests. Veliko čast in veselje mi je, da vas lahko v imenu Ministrstva za kulturo Republike Slovenije in tudi v svojem osebnem imenu nagovorim ob današnjem dogodku o trajnostni in pravični mobilnosti v kulturi. Mobilnost v kulturi je že stoletja ključnega pomena za sporočanje raznolikih, le posameznemu umetniku ali umetniškemu kolektivu lastnih poetik na eni strani in za interakcijo, sozven teh umetniških izrazov v prav tako raznolikih kulturnih skupnostih in svetovih posameznikov na drugi strani. Poleg odprtega pogleda v svet in radovednosti, ki je pogosto prva spodbujevalka ustvarjalnosti, je prav mobilnost predpogoj za iskreno izmenjavo mnenj, za skupno rast tistega, ki prinaša in tistega, ki sprejema, za spoštljiv poklon umetnosti, drugačnosti, za vabilo k soustvarjanju. Mobilnost v umetnosti je obet za širitev obzorij in za utrjevanje mostov. Na Ministrstvu za kulturo dajemo mobilnosti prav poseben pomen in v pomen njene krepitve izvajamo številne projekte in mehanizme. Poleg spodbujanja mobilnosti v okviru rednih razpisov na področjih umetnosti in kulturne dediščine, dovolite, da danes izpostavim še dva posebna instrumenta. Eden od njih je spodbujanje delovanja in ustvarjanja slovenskih umetnikov v umetniških rezidencah na Dunaju, New Yorku, Londonu in Berlinu. Tam obetajočim ter uveljavljenim umetnikom omogočamo, da ustvarjajo v miru in da obenem tkejo pomembna mednarodna partnerstva. Podporo mobilnosti na področju umetnosti izvajamo tudi s pomočjo skupnega kulturnega sklada Ministrstva za kulturo in Ministrstva za evropske in zunanje zadeve, s pomočjo katerega mobilnost podpiramo s pomočjo diplomatsko-konzularnih predstavništev Slovenije v svetu. Oba instrumenta veljata za uspešna, prepoznavna, oba smo v lanskem letu dodatno prenovili, posodobili, slednjemu smo namenili tudi tretjino več sredstev. A to seveda ni dovolj. Zavedamo se, da se umetniki in producenti prav na področju umetnosti, na polju mobilnosti soočate s številnimi težavami. Za tiste, ki so vaši nezaželeni sopotniki že dalj časa, vemo. Gre za omejeno dostopnost informacij s področja socialnih, davčnih, vizumskih sistemov, ampak zanje tako na evropski kot na medvladnih ravnih že iščemo skupne rešitve. Bolj ranljivi smo, kadar pride do izzivov, na katere nismo bili pripravljeni, ali pa smo mislili, da smo pred njimi varni, da so daleč stran od nas. Ne vemo še, če smo popolnoma premagali pandemijo, ki je mobilnost na vseh področjih, pa tudi na področju umetnosti, za nekaj časa popolnoma zavrla. Obenem pa smo vedno pogosteje soočeni s številnimi katastrofalnimi naravnimi nesrečami, ki so posledica klimatskih sprememb. Še pred nekaj meseci si v Sloveniji sploh ne bi mogli predstavljati tako rušilne moči ujme, kot nas je pred kratkim prizadela. Ko se je približeval njen drugi val in so številni že pomagali pri opravljanju posledic prvega, smo na Blejskem strateškem forumu razpravljali o tem, da demokracije brez umetnosti sploh ne more biti. Avtoritarni pristopi oblasti lahko namreč ob utišenem glasu kulture prav tako povzročijo ujme in razdejanja, tokrat pač na občutljivem družbenem tkivu. K ugotovitvi, da brez kulture ni demokracije, naj dodam, da se tudi razcvet raznolikosti kulturnih izrazov brez mobilnosti ne more zgoditi. Prilagoditi pa se moramo razmeram in mobilnost napraviti bolj trajnostno in bolj pravično. Nekateri koraki v to smer so že bili storjeni. Evropska komisija je lani začela z izvajanjem široke sheme Kultura premika Evropo, Culture Moves Europe, v okviru katere omogoča dodatne finančne spodbude izvajalcem, ki pri izmenjavah izbirajo bolj trajnostne oblike prevozov. V okviru delovnega načrta za kulturo za leta 2023 do 2027 smo države članice Evropske unije predvidele tudi delovanje skupine strokovnjakov, ki bo pripravila priporočila za zeleni prehod na področju kulture. Z luksemburško kolegico pa prav tako v okviru navedenega delovnega načrta sopredsedujeva skupini strokovnjakov, ki pripravlja priporočila za boljše upravljanje in vključevanje vseh deležnikov pri mednarodnih kulturnih odnosih Evropske unije. Dobre prakse spodbujanja k trajnostnim izmenjavam bodo zaživele tudi doma, v novem akcijskem načrtu pri resoluciji o nacionalnem programu za kulturo, ki bo kmalu ugledala luč sveta in kjer bo trajnostni vidik še prav posebej izpostavljen. Ob vsem opravljenem pa se zavedamo, da smo na področju zelenega prehoda šele na začetku. Za snovanje kakovostnih pristopov potrebujemo tudi temeljne predpogoje. Mednje zagotovo sodita kakovostna infrastruktura javnih prevozov ter pravične sheme za podporo trajnostni mobilnosti. Kulturna politika pa celovitega pristopa ne more ne premišljevati, ne vzpostavljati brez dialoga s sektorjem. Prav posveti, kakršen je današnji, pripomorejo k prepoznavanju potreb, k snovanju ukrepov, ki so zasnovani po meri sektorja, brez stigmatiziranja, s vključevanjem vseh, tudi tistih iz manj privilegiranih okolij in iz bolj ranljivih skupin. Zato iskrena zahvala ekipi Motovile. Že vrsto let aktivno sooblikujete slovensko kulturno krajino in ukrepe slovenske kulturne politike. Nenehno postavljate težka vprašanja na domači in na evropski ravni. K nam v goste pripeljete strokovnjake, ki nam lahko pomagajo z odgovori, in dosegli ste nekaj, kar je pravzaprav v Sloveniji kar težko predstavljivo. Za zaveznika vas jemljejo tako kulturni ustvarjalci, kot tudi snovalci kulturne politike. Spoštovani, dovolite, da se pred zaključkom zahvalimo tudi Cankarjevemu domu, kjer se današnji dogodek dogaja. Danes se srečujemo v dvorani, ki že z izbiro materialov potrjuje trajnost v kulturi, njeno ime pa nosi ime svetovne popotnice Alme Karlin, ki je prav tako zelo imeniten okvir za današnje pogovore. Želim vam uspešno iskrenje idej. Hvala lepa.
Thank you, Sonja, and thank you to the Ministry of Culture for the support. I will use the privilege and welcome our dear guests and audience in Slovene as well. This is a rare opportunity, and I'm confident that Tony will shortly summarize in English soon after, and then we will switch to English. Welcome, dear guests, lepo pozdravljeni. Se pravi, preden povabimo na oder strokovnjake in ustvarjalce, ki bodo razpravljali, kot je bilo že omenjeno, o trajnostni in pravični mednarodni mobilnosti v kulturi. Naj na kratko pojasnim kontekst, ki nas je na Motovili spodbudil k organizaciji foruma. Leta 2019 je bil sprejet Evropski zeleni dogovor, vsi ga poznamo, ki postavlja podnebne spremembe v središče vseh politik Evropske unije. Da bi se ti cilji dosegli, komisija vključuje varstvo okolja, trajnost in boj proti podnebnim spremembam prav vse politike Evropske unije in tudi v vse programe, vključno z ustvarjalno Evropo, ki je okvirni program za podporo kulturnega in ustvarjalnih sektorjev. Gospodarsko rast kot osrednjo prioriteto predhodnega programa Ustvarjalna Evropa so v aktualnem obdobju, ki traja do leta 2027, nadomestili novi cilji. Ti poudarjajo socialno kohezijo, vključevanje, enakost spolov in Evropski zeleni dogovor, več pozornosti se namenja inovacijam in čezmejni mobilnosti. Leta 2019, se pravi istega leta, smo na Motovili prvič organizirali mednarodni forum Mobilnost za ustvarjalnost in ob opozorilih dr. 𝗀𝗽𝗶𝗴 razmišljali že takrat o okoljsko zaveščeni in počasni mobilnosti, slow mobility v kulturi. Kdo bi si takrat mislil, da se bo zgolj čez nekaj mesecev mobilnost dejansko zaustavila zaradi pandemije COVID. Danes, le 4 leta kasneje, ko navidezno COVID nima več nikakršnega nadzora nad nami, pa podnebne spremembe, kot je že povedala gospa Kralj, nikakor niso več oddaljen fenomen, ampak realnost, ki si moramo prilagoditi prav vsi. Verjamemo, da ima kultura ključno vlogo pri zelenem prehodu. Zato si na Motovili prizadevamo promovirati inovativne prakse, ki jih kulturni sektor že uvaja na tem področju in nekatere bodo predstavili tudi naši gostje danes. Hkrati pa želimo spodbujati kulturne izvajalce k premisleku in spremembi svojih praks. Z dogodki, kot je današnji, pa tudi jutrišnja zelena delavnica, ki jo organiziramo v sodelovanju z Umanotero in Inštitutom za politike prostora, pa jih želimo opolnomočiti z informacijami, znanjem in orodji, da bojo lažje upoštevali trajnostne vidike pri svojem vsakodnevnem delovanju, pa tudi mednarodnem sodelovanju. Kot je bilo seveda že omenjeno in česar se vsi zavedamo, mednarodna mobilnost je pomemben element poklicne umetniške kariere in pri tem ne zatiskamo si več oči, je treba nujno upoštevati vpliv na okolje in podnebje, vendar pa se je treba hkrati tudi zavedati, da na primer stroški povezani z zeleno mobilnostjo za predstavnike tega sektorja predstavljajo dodatno obremenitev, saj nimajo enakega dostopa do infrastrukture, finančnih virov in informacij. Tudi Evropski parlament, ki je leta 2020 pozval komisijo k ozelenitvi ustvarjalne Evrope, je med drugim izpostavil, naj se udeležencem programa omogoči, da izberejo načine prevoza, ki najmanj onesnažujejo, ne da bi stigmatizirali, diskriminirali ali izključili udeležence, ki nimajo druge izbire, kot da uporabijo letalski prevoz, pri čemer naj se posebna pozornost nameni ruralnim, in najbolj oddaljenim regijam in območjem. Evropski parlament poleg tega komisijo tudi poziva, mi pa enak poziv naslavljamo tudi na odločevalce doma, naj najde načine, da se bodo dodatni stroški in čas potovanja povezani z okolju prijaznejšim načinom prevoza v celoti povrnili in upoštevali. Enak pristop zagovarja tudi On the Move, to je Evropska mreža za spodbujanje mobilnosti v kulturi, katere članica je tudi Motovila, ki se zavzema za uveljavitev koncepta pravične mobilnosti, s katerim je povezano zavedanje, da moč in neenakost vplivata na upravljanje in dostopnost mobilnosti ter oblikujeta vzorce neenakosti mobilnosti ljudi, virov in informacij. Študija o zelenitvi ustvarjalne Evrope, ki jo je naročila Evropska komisija, je izšla letos maja, ponuja pa smernice za prijavitelje, evalvatorje in izvajalce projektov, ter izpostavlja tudi obstoječe dobre prakse. Ta obsežen strateški dokument pa je hkrati tudi akcijski načrt, ki med drugim napoveduje postopno uvedbo ozelenitve kot formalne, horizontalne prednostne naloge tega programa. Avtorji študije ob tem izpostavljajo, da je izvedljiv in realističen proces ozelenitve kulturnega sektorja lahko samo postopen. Proces, v katerega naj bodo vključeni vsi deležniki, mora upoštevati nacionalne, sektorske in druge okoliščine in pa vire, ki so sektorju dejansko na voljo. Današnji forum zato želi prispevati tudi k razpravi o tem, kaj je vloga ustvarjalcev in kulturnih delavcev v procesu zelenega prehoda in kakšne strukturne pogoje sektor potrebuje, da se lahko prilagodi, ublaži vpliv na okolje ter s svojimi vsebinami in delovanjem spodbudi k spremembam, svojo publiko in tudi onkraj meja sektorja prispeva k oblikovanju miselnosti, ki je spoštljiva do okolja in podnebja in družbe, ki temelji na vzajemnem razumevanju in spoštovanju. Foruma ne bi bilo mogoče izvesti brez podpore, kot že rečeno, Ministrstva za kulturo, Evropske komisije in Mestne občine Ljubljana, zato ob tej priložnosti tudi iskrena hvala.
Najlepša hvala, tako Sonji Kralj kot seveda Mateji Lazar za uvodna nagovora. Ker gre za mednarodni dogodek, pa bomo tokrat presedlali na angleščino. So, switch. From now on, the working language of the conference is English only. In first speech, Sonja Kralj emphasized that the Ministry of Culture assigns a great importance to cultural mobility and has implemented several projects and mechanisms to strengthen it. The Ministry is aware that artists and cultural professionals face many challenges, among them COVID pandemics and natural disasters such as the recent floods that hit Slovenia. Sonja Kralj pointed out that solutions are already being sought on the EU and intergovernmental levels to overcome both the administrative challenges of mobility and the green transition. Please give her another round of applause. And in her speech, Mateja Lazar underlined that the event aims at contributing to the discussion on the role of artists and cultural workers in the green transition. It also aims to identify the structural conditions that the sector needs to be able to adapt, mitigate its impact on the environment, environment and contribute to shaping a mindset that is respectful of the environment. Please, another round of applause to Mateja, Lazar. And we continue with a keynote by Tim Wagendorp, an internationally renowned expert on sustainable practices in the cultural and creative sectors. After working as an environmental scientist and policy expert for a federation of reuse companies, Tim Wagendorp has been the sustainability coordinator at the Vlaams Audiovisueel Fonds since 2017. In his keynote, Tim will talk about what sustainability means and how it relates to the cultural and creative sectors. How do we know if something is sustainable or not? How do we measure our impact and improve our practices? These are just some of the topics that our keynote speaker, Tim Wagendorp, will stress out. Please give a warm and huge applause to Mr. Tim Wagendorp from Vlaams Audiovisueel Fonds. I hope I pronounced it right. Thanks.
Before I start, I come from Belgium, and Belgium is known for some things, including beer, but also French fries with mayonnaise. Who of you ever attempted to make your own mayonnaise? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Not a lot of people, but if you think about what you needed to make mayonnaise, it was oil, vinegar, eggs, pepper, salt, a lot of good luck, and some magic, and then you had mayonnaise or some salad dressing. And for me, this metaphor is exactly the same metaphor as being sustainable in the cultural or media sector. I'm not always going to look back. If it disappears, just start yelling. But being sustainable, I work for the film industry. It's again a mix of ingredients. It's knowledge, it's a market with suppliers, it's motivation, it's money, it's creativity. And if one of these elements lacks, you don't have mayonnaise. And I start with my conclusion of my lecture, but it's, I think it's important to mention. When you would say about all of these elements are important, and I want to stress it also, we are all role models. We're not only about how to come to Motovila's event or how to drink coffee or the logistics, but it's also about we represent a cultural sector, and people look at us, and we can be a part of the solution, not part of the problem, and I think we should be aware of that, next to all the things we do in our daily jobs. The first important question is, what is sustainability? Because when you look in the newspaper or you want to watch TV, there's so much bullshit being told. We have all these words. People talk about green, but green is the color of the tree outside. People talk about CO2 and carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. People speak about bio and fair trade, and I have a bio film or a carbon neutral film or an ecological film, but all these different words mean different things. But maybe when you think about what is sustainability, you have so many different definitions, and people, they just sell bullshit. And I think one of the main challenges is to define your scope. And I talk about film projects. When I speak to people, I tell them what's really important for your project and for your job as a filmmaker. You have to know I work for a public fund. We give away public money to filmmakers, and I tell them how to spend their money wisely / sustainably. And it can be about taking care of the planet. It can be about taking care of safety. It can be about food catering, about water, about all the different elements. And it's not only about what to do to have a job today and to make a film today, but it's also think about the future, and the future about next generations and how to make things that are positive for the planet. What we use in our fund is this. I don't know if anybody has seen this. Who knows this? Most of you? Great. This is made by the United Nations. It's 17 different forms of sustainability. And I try to talk about this with filmmakers because it's much more human and low level than carbon in the stratosphere. This is not perfect, this is lobbying. There has been a lot of lobbying to make these 17 goals. Why 17 and not 18? Why isn't water in it, or clean air, or culture, and the right for culture? So, but this is again, for me, a good start. And it brings me to a second question. Knowing that if one film, you can measure all the logistics, and I see that's something went wrong with the number, but one film in Flanders, you can calculate the impact. It represents 73 tons of carbon emissions, and which is the same as 10 families in a year. So imagine 10 families watching Netflix, going on holidays, putting up their airco, all their impact together, heating, food, their dog, times 10. 1 year long, that's the impact of making one film. And a film in Belgium, in Flanders, it's small because in my region, a big production is about 2.4 million euros. Hardly nobody in Europe speaks Dutch, so we have a small market. We're together with the Dutch and with South Africans, we speak the same language, so the market is small. But take a film in England, you talk about 10 times the budget. When you go to the blockbusters in the States, you talk about 100 times this budget. Then you're not talking about the impact of 10 families, but the impact of a village per year, just to make one Superman film. And another point I wanted to stress out is you can be hyper-sustainable at home and do everything by bike and eat veggie and all that stuff. But imagine you can only reduce in your household. But if you apply the same in your professional life, you can have a much more professional impact, a better impact than what you can do at home with your dog and your family. And when I contact people, when I contact filmmakers in my region, in many cases they look at me, but how can I be sustainable? I'm the filmmaker. But the choices they make in the logistic choices, also including mobility, they have such an impact and they're not aware of it. And it's my job in the fund to talk about that impact and to find solutions. I could talk about this topic all day, but I'm only given half an hour. So I will be brief and strict. One thing, again, regarding what makes something sustainable, you could think about, okay, I took the plane to Ljubljana, but I walked this morning from my hotel to the event. You could calculate all the carbon and then think about, should I pay somebody to offset my impact? And like it's being a bad person, going to church once a year, confessing your sins and everybody's happy? Or should I think about creating something positive? And maybe I could also do insetting and reduce the impact by my own actions, me talking to you, and maybe you should all be my ambassadors and try to helping me to offset or to compensate my flight here. So you should all be part of my small army of trolls and spread the word and reduce my impact in this way. But I'm not ashamed to fly here because I looked at, could I come by train? I could have, but it would take me ages and ages and ages. So it was a calculated decision. And we as a company, I work for a public fund, we are thinking about, instead of paying others to offset and to confess my sins and to pay for that carbon, maybe we should use the same budget in our own bookkeeping system and invest it in our own sustainable actions. And maybe we can use that money to pay a more sustainable server or a better catering company, or invest in train traffic instead of air traffic for our staff. So it's again awareness. But that brings us to an important question. It's about what is sustainability? When can you say that something's sustainable? Okay, last pictures before I change slides. They will be shared anyway, so you can also find them back afterward. But one of the topics I ask is, imagine that my film production is carbon neutral, but my boss is a sexist. Is that sustainable? Or I shoot in the lovely, the mountain next to us, but my truck is leaking oil. Is that sustainable? So the big question is, what is sustainable and what makes something sustainable? And we have been calculating a lot. We have a carbon calculator, and before we put a lot of data in Excels. But for me, it's much more about an awareness. It's about, and I talk about film production, it's about knowing in advance what will be my challenges within my specific production, regarding broad sustainability. And it can be, I shoot in Ljubljana, how to make sure that the people that live in the neighborhood where I'm shooting are not pissed off by all the noise, by the generator in front of their doorstep, etc. It can be about, I need to put 500 people, actors on a mountain hill. How can I do that safely? They all have to drink, how to bring the water to the hill. So it can be very broad. But it's about, do you have a plan before you start? And are you aware of the challenges you have? Also on mobility. That's one. And if you can say yes on that first question, I think is the first big step. Then the second step is, do you try to make the right sustainable choices while producing, while filming? And there it's about creativity, it's about money, it's about is everything available on site or not? It's about motivation, because everybody says, fuck it, then you're screwed, sorry for my language. But so it's again mayonnaise, and it's about trying to do the best you can during production. And can we be all perfect? Probably not, but we can try. And then for me, the third step in that awareness, the third yes is, once you're finished, do you look back and do you try to evaluate, did it work, yes or no? And what do we take from this? And for my fund, if you can say three times yes, we consider you as being aware about the impact you have, which is much more than saying you have to stay below 73 tons or reduce 5%, because how to measure that? And especially in Belgium, you probably know Belgians are good in creative solutions. So for us, the awareness is much more important. So it's three times yes. It brings me to, and I see, yeah, sorry. Another question, where does this start and where does it stop? And when I started my job about 7 years ago, the focus was, let's reduce CO2 in a film set. But one of the questions was, is CO2 the only challenge, or is it broader, the SDGs, as we saw? And a second question was, where does it start and where does it stop? And don't we have to convince the entire value chain? And in my case, this is my value chain, starting at school. Because I don't know how it is in Slovenia or in your regions, but in Belgium, no filmmaker in 𝗀𝗲𝗶 who's studying today at film school is taught about sustainability and about their potential impact as a professional. Nobody. And sometimes I go there, I'm invited to talk for an hour, and then they think it's funny and they go away and business is solved. So I think we should talk to students and their professors, and to make sure that these teachers, they can embed this topic in their topic, because it's not about how to be sustainable as a filmmaker, but it's also about you're studying to become a set constructor. You should know everything about wood and screws and glue and circular economy. So it's really into the department and the skills of the people. But it's not only that, it's also, can all these students, these clever people, work for us, work for me, and maybe do scientific research for me. I had students doing life cycle assessments on water supplies, on sets, on costume design, on whatever topic, and they can really dig and help me to understand better what's real impact. So that's for me the start of this. And it could also include, I left school 10 years ago. Should I go back to school after 10 years to restudy some topics on sustainability? So it's also about how can we involve existing professionals in this debate. Next step is, and for me it's a big taboo, is the storytelling. Because I work for a public fund, and if I should give you money to make a film and I tell you should write about this, that's not really open and creative. That's called censorship. And that's something we can't do and that we don't want to do. But we want to open the discussion with people that write scripts about sustainability. Again, it could be that broad scope of SDGs, 17 forms of sustainability, or even more. I just brought you some examples. This is 𝗀𝗲𝗶𝗶. It's a game we funded. And within the game, you have to collect waste in the sea and create a new society. And I spoke to the producer of this game, and I said, this is a Trojan horse, because you speak to all these gamers on their private screen about SDG whatever, cleaning the ocean, and SDG whatever, recycling and reusing, a circular economy. And maybe you should talk to the waste agencies in Belgium or in Flanders and ask them money, because you're part of the communication system and you can reach people that your fancy flyers will never reach. And he looked at me saying, I just wanted to make something cool. So, but it's a great example on how the content we make can be sustainable. I brought some others. Maybe, did anybody of you see Close? 1, 2, 3, great. If you didn't see it, try to see it. You will cry your heart out. But within this film, a mother and a child, they have a talk. They say, okay, we should talk. And she takes 2 glasses of tap water and they have a meaningful discussion. It could also be 2 cans of Coca-Cola and a meaningful discussion. But again, it was such a subtle way to just visualize sustainability in daily life in our creations. It doesn't cost you anything. It's very subtle. It's almost like product placement, but in a positive way. Another example, who of you watch pornography? Who of you watches pornography? Thank you. This is a screenshot of Pornhub. And in the middle, you see a couple having sex on a beach. And they had sex on a beach full of plastic litter. And they made it the point of, isn't it a shame that we are in this beautiful tropical island and it's full of litter? So even in that industry, and I'm not related to it financially, but it's such a nice example that in that industry, people are thinking about societal impact in the storytelling, and they even clean up the beach afterwards with part of the income of the production. Who of you working in the cultural sector would ever do something like this? Probably no, but not in Belgium, I guess no filmmaker will ever go that far. Talking about mobility, this is a documentary funded about solitude of an Hungarian or a Bulgarian truck driver. And they follow the guy 3 years about all these people. They leave their house 3 months in a row. They drive all over Europe. They bring all the stuff we buy online. And meanwhile, he gets further and further away from his family. So again, important sustainable topic, well-being, transport, mobility, and how it can be part of the creations we make and we fund. A last one, this is an Estonian artist who sings about the link between culture and nature, and between the people and how they live in nature. And so this is an image I stole from a music festival in Brussels. And they invited that person to have a concert in an old museum surrounded with dinosaurs, and to show that to the public in Belgium that you can also sing about your link and your heritage towards your environment. Which again, we move one step up in the value chain. Money, and that's an important one. I work for 𝗀𝗲𝗲, as the person introducing me was trying to explain, and he did a great job. We are a public fund. We give away a lot of money, public money, taxpayers' money, and we use it as a leverage towards sustainability. It's like when I give my kids pocket money and I tell them it's not for cigarettes. We do the same at 𝗀𝗲𝗲 level with our support with filmmakers. And it's my job, my daily job, to tell people how they can translate that into their practical jobs. And the last 10% of our payments, and we pay up till 600,000 euros per project, so it's about a lot of money, is only given when they can prove that they tried their best. And no, we never took anybody's money. It's a question I get all the time. That again, it's not about numbers, it's about the awareness and the trying to be sustainable. But it brings us to a big dinosaur in the room, or an elephant in the room, and that's about the film funding. I don't know how it is in culture exactly, but within the film industry, filmmakers, they shop around to have their budget fixed, and they shop all over Europe in regional funds, national funds, European funds, and they are paid to travel all over Europe to spend these euros regionally. When you come to Flanders, when you spend my money, you have to spend it in Flanders. So in a way, the regulations we invented as funds are not sustainable, because I push you on a plane or in a truck to come to my region. So that again, I think this is something we should discuss as policymakers on. Isn't the way we fund films from the prehistoric times, and should we rethink it and within the scope of sustainability? And within the pandemic, you saw that some funds stopped their obligations and they say you can spend it wherever you want. But we should talk about this, but it's another discussion. And I'm really happy that I don't have to solve this. It's a complex one. And it's not only about money and funding, but it's also about sustainability and how can it be paid. Because in my language, sustainable is duurzaam, and duur is expensive. So people think it's expensive sustainability. So we also explain them it's not only about putting more money in fancy stuff and toys for boys, but it's also about using your brain and prevention and not driving instead of paying a lot for a Tesla. But I give you some examples from the production side. Also looking at my watch. Some publicity. We created a European tool called 𝗀𝗍𝗲, and this is a tool like a pocket knife with different functions, but it helps filmmakers to put values on their choices and to translate transport and energy and food into CO2 and other types of impact. And it helps us to understand where the real impacts are. And I once coached a project from the Flemish broadcaster. They had a paperless office. They didn't print any piece of paper, and they calculated the impact of that. It was really good because they saved money and some carbon. But in the comparison to all the other choices they made on set, it was invisible. It was just a waste of time. So the conclusion was maybe you should put more money or more effort in your transport or your waste than to not printing. And if you can not print, it's good, but by calculating, you see where your real impact is. Some examples. Mobility, the average Flemish film has about 40% of impact is linked to traveling around. It's traveling of people and stuff. The same will be for culture. And there it's about, are you aware of the impact you have? This was a Flemish production gangster. I'm not going to tell you about the story. It's a funny youth film. At one point, they were hyper-sustainable in Flanders for 35 days. And then they messed up by flying to Morocco. And all the efforts they did, and they rented an apartment for 4 heads of departments so they could sleep close to the set and not drive their trucks all the time. They prevented a lot of CO2 and a lot of euro and a lot of kilometer transport. But by just flying to Morocco, they blew up everything. And the images they shot in Morocco was sniffing coke in a discotheque and shooting a gun on a beach. You could have shot these images wherever. So it's also part of, when I asked, can a script be sustainable? When you write, my hero flees to Morocco and sniffs coke in a discotheque, you could also write, my hero sniffs coke in his garden shed and stays home. Same story, but another impact. It's serious, you shouldn't laugh at it. But for me, when I told these people, these producers, about how that trip to Morocco blew up everything, for them it was an eye-opener, and they said, fuck. And they were preparing a zombie movie and a war movie, and they said, I will beat you with my zombies, and I will be more sustainable than you with your submarine. Buck, another example. It was a production from the Flemish broadcaster, TV series, 73 shooting days. And they made a daily transport and mobility plan for everybody, for every shooting day. They looked at, where do you live? How do you have to come to the set? Can we put you on a train? Shall there be a shuttle bus picking you up from the train station to the set? Can we have people carpooling? Can we put trucks at night near the set instead of driving up and down to the broadcaster? Then they had a fight with the union because the law says that you're paid to leave your house in the morning, go to the office in Brussels, take the truck in from Brussels, drive to the set and back, and not leave your truck somewhere near the set. So that was a legal problem. But they were able to prevent like 43,000 kilometers of driving by being clever. And they even went into they called the actors at the same time. They said, okay, you're 2 actors, you live in the same city. We ask you to come to the set at the same time so you can carpool. So they even went that far. So it's also part of the creative choices they made in the design of their production. And then it brings us to another topic. And it's a challenge even for me. Maybe one of you has a solution, but it's also about where do you shoot? How do you select your shooting locations? And maybe mobility should be part of the locations we choose. This event, this Motovila event, could also be somewhere on a mountainside, 80 kilometers from this place where you can only go by car. No, it was a decision to have it here so people can take their bike or walk or come by train or by bus. So it's about how do you select your locations, and creativity and the quality of the set is the most important. And even when another location is farther away but you need it for your shooting, you should do it. But it's about can accessibility be part of the selection of sets of the scouting process? That's one. Once you scouted all your sets, a second question might be, I have to combine 40 locations, how to travel from A to B to C, and what's the most logic, most economic, most sustainable frequency between these different locations? Is it from A to B to C to D, or can I make some logic in it? That's the second one. And the third one is, okay, I shoot a day in Ljubljana. How should I take by bus? Should I come by car, by bike? So it's a more logistic choices. But it can be a question on, can we really use this logic as part of the planning and the preparation of the events we host? And the events we host, imagine a tour of a music group. Do they travel like random over Europe, or is there a logic in their tour? And can tools help us? I don't know. Does anybody know 𝗀𝗲𝗲𝗶? I used it before I decided to take the plane to Ljubljana. I put in Brussels, Ljubljana, and it's a website, 𝗀𝗲𝗲𝗶𝗃.org. Look it up, take a picture, look it up after the meeting. And it's really cool. You just fill it in, you click yes, and in 2 seconds you see the difference. In this case, it's the train would be 34 kilograms of CO2, the car 120, and the plane 153. So up to you, my troll army, you have to reduce 120 kilograms of CO2 to compensate for my traveling. But I trust you, you will do that. But so another example, 𝗀𝗲𝗲𝗶, it's a documentary festival in Amsterdam. When you inscribe, the first thing you see is this, and they push you to take the train. They make it as simple as possible to take the train at the inscription level. They have a logistic partner who will book the train tickets. So again, it's a way to, about awareness, they are aware we have an event, it's in Amsterdam, but how can we move our public as sustainable as possible to the event? And you can still decide, do I want to take the train, yes or no, but you make it as simple as possible. Another example I stole from 𝗀𝗽𝗲𝗃. Does anybody of you know 𝗀𝗽𝗃? They made a map of Europe, connecting all the big cities that can be reached by train in 4 hours. So again, and this is more visual, but it's a way to make it visible and to make it as simple as possible to look for alternatives than cars or planes. Another example from Brussels, Ancien Belgique. Anybody wants one? Great, 2, 3. They're a great place. They're a music venue in Brussels, and when you book a ticket, you can take the metro for free, or the tram or the bus for free, and they allow you to pay to buy a cheap train ticket, and they even adapt their program so you're sure you can take the last train back home. So then the first thing you see when you leave the concert is the direction toward the station with all the different schedules and the delays probably. For people that know Belgium, but they make it as simple as possible when you go there, and they keep statistics, and you can see the numbers going up by people taking a bus or a train to come to Brussels. And they even do the same towards their artists. So when you're a famous musician, they will say, okay, we have place for 2 trucks, and that's it, and they will push you to be as sustainable as possible. I showed the image of the Estonian musician. This was at the Walden Festival. And in Walden, they even take it a step further. They do everything hyper-sustainable. They have 3 parking places for handicapped people, and that's it. But they also talk to other festivals, which have a similar programming, to see, can we invite people at the same time, so they don't have to travel from A to B to C, but they can just stay around and travel to and it was with a festival in Holland. So it invited international guests that stayed over for a week in Holland or in Belgium. They didn't have to do a lot of traveling. So they put it as part of the programming. Okay. These, I just go through them quickly, but we had 40% of transport, and it's a big one, and it's about awareness and choices, and also about where do we work and how do we go to work. Energy is 5%. There it's about, do we really need a generator? I was here in Ljubljana. I saw a production of a commercial. They had the biggest generator van ever. You could say, why? There's plenty of energy in the city. So it's about that type of choices. Wastes and materials is another important one, 28%. And there we try to convince people to work circular. And it's not about using and throwing away, but it's about prevention. And I'm just going, you could rent second-hand or use second-hand stuff instead of buying it new from IKEA. This is a set which is completely printed on cardboard, so the kitchen you see is just fake. You don't have to make a real kitchen. The only thing that's real is the small table and the people, and everything in there, all the rest in the background is printed. This is the submarine I spoke about. But this thing, when you create such a thing, you should think about what the eco-design behind is, because when you calculate the impact, this is much more important than all the traveling and the catering and the energy together. So it's about how to build it, how can I make it in such a way that I can reuse it afterwards. They're now keeping it to make a second film in it. And if they can't, they will probably rent it or sell it to a neo-Nazi or a museum or an escape room or a fantasy park or whatever to try to reuse the set. And then it's also about, I have waste, what should I do with it? It's European legislation, is boring, so I will not mention it. But it's just about, again, about awareness and about knowing what are my regulations when I work in a city, what type of waste and where to take it. Catering is the second last one. It's a funny one because it's about food, about taking care of people. And I just want to show you this. If you want to take one picture, you should take this one. This is called nudging. This is an example of a producer from the Flemish broadcaster, and all the catering is 100% veggie. And she says, if somebody really wants meat, it's no problem. I allow you, but you just have to call the cook. Take your phone, call the catering company, he will bring the meat for you. It's called nudging. It's about making the best thing, the most easy thing. Ready with your picture? Okay. And then the last topic, and then I'm almost done, is post-production and pre-production. It's everything we do in offices, but it's also the impact of the people behind the screen and all their equipment and computers and data processing and data storage, etc. And there again, it's a big question mark on what is the best. And slowly we're better in understanding the real impact. Just one example, Paris. This is a swimming pool in Paris, and it is heated, and I have to talk slowly. The water in this pool is heated with the residual heat of the server of an animation company. So you can go that far. I don't say you have to do it, but it shows you how people can think about their impact on that type of departments. I come back to this value chain. We spoke about going to school, about writing, about porn, about money, about production. And then the last thing is the consumption of what we make. And then I think about what's the impact of Netflix, what's the impact of watching films on your mobile phone or in the cinema or on a festival. And it's not only about the logistic impact, for instance, of a cinema, but also about the role they have as an ambassador. It's about, here again, this event is a great example. You drink coffee from a reusable mug and water from a reusable glass. No waste at all. Great. There's water in some container which comes from the tap. Great. No transport, no waste, no whatever. So it's about the choices we make logistically as a cinema, as an event, as a cultural event. It can be about heating my building. It can be about isolating my roof, about having the most sustainable whatever projector or so. But even more, and I think, and something I really want to stress, it's also about the role we have as professionals. Because when I invite you in my cinema, and I give you a beer, a Belgian beer in a glass instead of whatever beer in a plastic cup, I am an example, and I can explain how much CO2 you reduced. But I can also just shut up and let you drink your beer, and just do it as if it's normal. And it can be on that level, but it can also be about, I have a fancy event, and afterwards I have a debate with my public about whatever topic, about war, peace, gender, inclusion, diversity, all the topics that are so important for us. So it's also about that social role, that example we have as a sector on set, after the set, in the cinema, on the event, on the events. Because imagine that you have... and I think that the opening question that you asked was great. How did you come to this event? If your fancy actor would come by bike and everybody sees him on his or her bicycle coming to an event, that would be a great example. This is again an image I stole from 𝗲𝗲𝗲𝗲𝗲. 𝗲𝗲𝗲𝗲𝗲 is a forestry society. They try to do work on forestry, silviculture, and forest conservation. But they also host events in their forests, and they link culture and nature. And they use culture as a way to attract people to their forest and to discuss about the importance of forestation. So again, it's a way how we as culture and sustainability can be hand in hand, and we can really be part of the transition towards sustainability. And that's the last slide I have to show. I started mayonnaise. I'll stop with fries with mayonnaise. I hope you will all try to make mayonnaise at home. And yeah, that's it. That's, but I use the slide a lot. I don't know if there's time for questions or not. Always time for questions. Any questions? Now is the time. Maybe one thing I will mention, in Belgium, I work for the public fund. We try to talk to also other institutions at Belgian level, other film funds, also at European level, because what we see is that there are many different initiatives and they're all different, and it's stupid because we all want the same, being sustainable. But how stupid would it be to be a co-production in 5 countries and that you have to follow 5 different criteria? That's one thing. And another thing is, in Flanders we have something which is called 𝗀𝗲𝗲𝗲𝗲, which is a network for sustainability within youth, media and culture. And that again we try to, over sectors, we try to link sustainability and to discuss and find solutions together. Again, on the logistics side, do have common needs on how to embed it in storytelling, how to be the ambassador towards the public. So it's about Boy Scouts teaching filmmakers how to be sustainable on a production, etc. And I think that there's an enormous potential of opening these borders and talking to people, and because we all have the same challenges, but we just look at in a different place. A question, 2 questions. Great.
Thank you for your presentation, which was very interesting, and I like your approach very much. Yeah, the question I had is also about the, I mean, you mentioned it a bit, but about the criteria of how, basically, when you decide to give your funding, and that's a question we will have later also about funding calls, where one of the criteria is about green mobility. So how, in the end, do you decide whether a film is sustainable or not? And
that's the 1 million question, 1 million euro question.
You don't have, I mean,
yeah,
I will be talking later. So
no, but
you don't have to.
When you apply for my fund, sustainability is not part of the application at all. So you're evaluated on the quality of your project and the creativity and the financial whatever. And you will, once you get approval of the funding, then I step in, and then we start looking at how can we make this project in a sustainable way. We don't give bonuses, we don't give extra credits. And personally, I don't believe in bonuses, because imagine that if I would pay you more to be sustainable, should I also pay you more when nobody dies on your set? Or when there's no sexism on set? It's strange. So for me, it's not something on top, it's part of the professional choices we make. And I'm like an angel and a devil on their shoulder, helping them to find solutions. And I think that, again, and I'm also looking at Europe, there's an enormous potential in sharing these best practices. Because I had one example of a production in Belgium, not using a generator, but fixing to the main grid. And they picked it up in London. They created a socket for power in the city of London for film production. So I think we should exchange these best practices. But for me, a production that really says, sorry, but Tim, you're wrong, and this is nothing for us, there we will make a problem. But from the moment they say we want to try, and the first thing we need to do is make a good movie and be aware of the resources we use to make that movie. From the moment that they have that awareness, for me, it's okay. The second question.
Actually, it's a continuation of the question, because I was thinking, after the project is finished, implemented, do you also monitor in the questionnaires or reports how they were sustainable in ways of production, promotion, and so on?
The only formal obligation for our fund is at production level. And so imagine you're a producer. We have a talk about this, but in detail. I will ask you to make an action plan for your production. What will your focus be? You have to put it in Eureka, the online tool, so I can follow up and see the actions you do. And in the end, we will have a talk, a debriefing on what did you learn from this, and what can you take to future projects. So that's but it stops at once the production is finished, because then it goes to distribution. It's yet again another partner, and we don't have the direct link with the distribution, because it can be international and it's another business.
Thank you. Just a tiny question, because you've been mentioning sexism and other forms of discrimination. Is it that you also consult or look on that aspect, or is it more only on climate aspects and the other thing is on the side? Or do you also have a task to do to sustainability in the whole dimension of the SDGs that you mentioned before?
Within my fund, I have other colleagues working on diversity and inclusion, and I had to talk to them and to my boss saying it's all sustainable, because SDGs, everything's linked together. So it's a different department, different people, but we are now looking at how can we bring everything together and to put it in like a strategic document that links everything together, because it's not separate. It's not about having one Excel with CO2 and another with sexism or inclusion or diversity. It's one approach. But it's still scattered, even in Flanders. Okay, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. So thank you, Team Wagendorp from Vlaams Audiovisueel Fonds, for your keynote. It is hard to pronounce, but I'll actually manage it. Yeah. As we heard, there were great examples from film and audiovisual industry that could also be applied to music, to theater. And one of the topics that we stressed out is, of course, value chain and the choices we made. Because mobility is an important element of professional artistic activities and careers. It is therefore essential to consider our impact on the planet's resources, the environment, and the climate. Because the circumstances require an intersectoral approach to climate change, there are a growing number of calls for green mobility. How can we adapt our methods of mobility and our reasons for it? How can the cultural sector be resilient and adaptable? And how can it contribute to mitigating climate change? And now we will be continuing our discussion with our first panel. So I will try to find our guests, our speakers. It will be a panel discussion, policy-oriented, that means top-down session, where panelists will exchange strategies, approaches, and practices to be applied in future policies, of course at local and at national level. They will talk about how cultural networks approach to green mobility, how cultural sector can contribute to more sustainable development and greener mobility, and what is the role of public funders, how to ensure a more systemic approach to green mobility, and how could this be considered in EU funding programs and in national policies. So let me introduce the guests we invited on stage. Gabriele Rosana is the Policy Director of Culture Action Europe, the major European cross-sectoral cultural network, bringing together organizations, activists, policymakers, and academics. Gabriele, please present yourself.
Thank you
Just
very
wave,
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you said everything already. So
Oh,
thanks very much.
perfect, thank you.
Saved me minutes.
Dr. Aidan Cerar is a sociologist at IPOP. He has been mainly involved in projects dealing with urban regeneration, civic participation, and community involvement in planning and mobility. Dr. Aidan Cerar. Please give another round of applause for our speakers. Tina Kenk has been working at the Center for Mobility and European Education and Training Programs, CMEPIUS, for 16 years, where she is currently in charge of the Erasmus Plus Green contact point that helps to develop knowledge, skills and attitudes towards climate change and sustainable development. And the moderator of the discussion is Helena de Winter, a strong advocate for international cultural cooperation who supports cultural organizations in their international development strategies and European projects. She currently coordinates the project 𝗞𝗲𝗶𝗴, run by On the Move with partners touring artists and Motovila. So thank you, and please give them another huge round of applause.
Thank you very much for introducing us. Well, I'm very happy to be here, to be in Ljubljana, to be in this beautiful hall dedicated to Alma Karlin, one of the pioneer traveling women, and especially happy to be moderating this discussion on green mobilities also in the cultural sector. So I'm not an expert in climate change, but this topic raises a lot of questions to me. First of all, as most of you, I suppose, on a personal level, I'm convinced of the need to reduce our carbon footprint and to fight climate change. Of course, mobilities is one of the big issues. Well, personally, I work in the cultural sector, as you heard, in the international cooperation field, so I travel quite a lot for work, for professional events, project meetings, etc. And so I travel a lot. Well, for instance, I came here to Ljubljana. For me, it was quite easy to use the train. I live close to Paris in France. I have a train station in my village, so I could take the train from my village to Paris, then another train from Paris to Zurich, and then the night train to Ljubljana. But in the end, yeah, it's a decision to take the train. But also, I felt that for me, I would not have left quite very much earlier if I had taken a flight. I would have spent a night in Ljubljana, one more night here, but in the end, it doesn't change very much how much time I'm away from home. So for me, I feel it's quite easy to take the train because usually it doesn't take me that much longer, and Paris is easily linked to a lot of cities in Europe. But of course, the question is about those artists and professionals who are not in this case, who may live in more remote places, who are more impacted by also financial decision regarding this. So if we zoom out a bit and take a wider look at our sectors and think about green mobilities, well, how inclusive are these green mobilities, and especially programs that fund projects with criteria of green mobilities? I would like to mention a report that was commissioned by the European Commission regarding which is called Greening the Creative Europe Programme. And this gives a definition of green mobility, which I will read to you. So green mobility in the context of the study is used to refer to modes of transport that seek to reduce their environmental impact and impact on climate change. Mobility can be considered green or greener when walking or using transportation modes, including bicycles, electric bicycles or scooters, public transport, electric cars, hydrogen cars, carpooling or car sharing of low-emission cars, etc. So we all agree it's better to use green mobilities, but also this definition feels a bit incomplete to me, and it's also the position of On the Move, because maybe it lacks a bit taking into account specificities of each organization or artist, cultural professional, and the impact it may have regarding economic costs, regarding the duration, the additional duration when using some of these mentioned mobilities. For instance, if it can be discriminating to people who may not be able to leave home for a long time because they have elderly people to care for, they have young children at home, which also raises a question on gender equality, because more often it's women who are impacted by this. This also raises question on the impact on audiences, and to me the risk of having maybe fewer international artists traveling, or only having those who are able to travel and organize the longer tours. It raises the question of the level of responsibility, and maybe not putting all the pressure on the artists who are traveling, but also thinking about the whole sector and its responsibilities. So is it enough to say that we want greener mobilities, or shouldn't there be a more systemic approach from the sector, also regarding practices in general? And last but not least, is the impact of the cultural sector only directly on its carbon footprint and reducing its footprint? Or, well, we will see a bit about it, but couldn't our impact be a bit more on raising awareness about climate change, for instance? So, a lot of questions. We have about 1 hour to discuss this topic, or maybe a little less, I don't know. We probably won't have answers to all these questions, but I hope that, well, at least we have some great panelists here, and I hope we can bring some insights about this. And I would like to start with a question to Aidan. Aidan, you work on making urban places more sustainable. And so first of all, in your work, what roles do green mobilities have?
Yes, thanks very much. Of course, when talking about cities, you also talk about mobility, since ever. Nowadays, this has become much more important, much more significant, because we have been talking about the greenhouse gases emissions, about the CO2 and so on. And in majority of the sectors, the level of these emissions has been on the decrease. In the transport sector, has still been on the increase, which means it's most relevant to deal with this topic. And particularly in the cities, the emissions are not the only problem. You know, you have congestions, you have safety issues, breathing issues, and so on. So it's quite a relevant topic. It also has an economical, a social aspect in it. But it would take me quite a lot of time to discuss all that, so I'll skip a bit of it and go to how do we deal with mobility-related issues. My approach would always be try to find low-hanging fruits first. I'll give you an example. If you are, let's say, employed in a hospital living on that mountain over there, and you have a night shift, your possibility to do to travel to your work, a journey you do at the daily level, it's quite limited, you know. But on the other hand, if you take your kid to school, which is around the corner, you can choose. You can choose between walk to the school, you can choose between cycle to the school, or take your car. It might sound silly, but a lot of people, and I mean about 50% in some areas, would choose their car. And in Slovenia, if you check the data, about 50% of car journeys are shorter than 2 kilometers. Quite a lot of low-hanging fruits in that department. Of course, not every journey can be replaced with a bike or by walking, but the majority of these journeys could. And on the other hand, this would also be approach I would take at the international level. The thing we have discussed today, how the mobility at the transnational level functions at the European level. Not everyone has a choice between taking a train, as you said, instead of flying. But quite some people do have this choice. So up to some point, it's the choice of an individual to choose the mode that it's more sustainable. But of course, not everything is at the level of an individual choice. On the other hand, as you have mentioned, the supply matters a lot. You being from Paris are supplied with great options to use the trains and so on. To live somewhere on the outskirts, it's quite different. The choices you have, the modes of mobility you can choose between. And here the system comes in. Here we need much more ambitious investments in order to supply people with more greener options to travel locally and internationally or between regions. Because basically, if we ask people how they like to travel, they're quite keen on traveling sustainably. a larger part of people are quite keen on traveling by bike or by train. They're quite satisfied if they have an option to. When we ask people how they travel or how they would like to travel, a very small percentage of people or a percentage of people that's much lower that actually does that would say, I enjoy driving to my work daily by car and so on.
Thank you. And well, maybe following on that, what about the cultural sector? Because so you work generally on urban sustainability in urban places, but what do you think how the cultural sector can contribute to more sustainable development and greener mobilities? And well, we had some discussions about that. You gave me some examples, but please could you share them?
I said on one hand, it's the choice of an individual. On the other hand, it's the supply of choices. And I believe we can do much more to improve the image of sustainable mobility to make these two ends meet. I'll give you an example. The 20th century was the century of the car. We have, I mean, the car was a sign of success, you know. Every one of us knows which car James Bond has or something like that. Tim, you have mentioned the gangster film. If I remember right, there's a cabrio BMW on the poster and there's a car chase in it. And it goes further. Every evening, if you check television, there would be a commercial for cars. And it would be a sunny afternoon, SUV driving fast through the city with waving hair. Well, the reality is it's not sunny afternoon, it's a rainy Monday morning. It's not traveling fast through the city, it's being stuck in the congestion. It's not waving hair, it's cursing because you've been on the same spot for 10 or 15 minutes. And SUV does not deliver you any kind of freedom because at the end, the parking space, it's too narrow to park your giant SUV in it. But still, we do quite a lot of homework in terms how people travel and why they travel like they travel, you know. And how they travel, I told you, we have numbers and so on, but why they travel as they travel would often be related or would come from the brand that sustainable mobility has. And people would say, well, it's just not for me, you know. I mean, the public transport, it's for elderly, it's for students and so on. And it's no surprise. I mean, Margaret Thatcher said that everyone above 30 on the public transport should consider himself as a failure. And this has still been with us. It's changing, it's on the decrease, but still, you know, we relate this traveling by car as a sign of status, success, and so on. And because of that, I would say we need to invest a lot more in promoting sustainable mobility at something that's quite cool to do, that you can do at your daily level, that you can do quite a lot of the journeys you do every day by foot, bike, or public transport. Because if I go back to where I started, I mean, when was the last time you saw a commercial for cars? Probably it was yesterday or the day before yesterday. When was the last time you saw a commercial for public transport? I pay attention to it and I see it once per month or something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting, of course, about the vision we have about what we use and so on. And but yeah, how do you think that the cultural sector, maybe above that, can it also help? So would it be through films and the way it shows?
Of course, that would be
mobilities, or
shall I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure. Of course, there's one part of the answer, but the second part of this answer is by now you have noticed we do quite a lot of work to take space from cars and give it to people to walk and cycle and so on. For example, we would do campaigns to redesign the street temporarily to reduce the space for cars and to make it much more safe and pleasant for pedestrians. And we do it because we want to influence the mayor to do it in a permanent manner. But of course, the mayors are a bit afraid because they're quite keen on getting re-elected usually. And lately, I'm very, very keen on cooperation we have established with a street theater, Anna Monroe. how they work, it's impressive. In terms, we are good. We know the numbers. We can organize a public hearing. We can interview people and so on and get their opinions. But the main thing is about communicating this temporary redesign in order to feel good in the street, And once, for example, in a smaller Slovenian town, the street theater started out of the blue their show, and in 3 minutes we had the king of the street, queen of the street, and 50 people marched through the street that has been closed for cars half an hour before that. And these people just liked it, and no one was talking about, oh, now the cars will not be able to pass the street. People just enjoyed the public space. And the second trick we do is about, we do this too in front of schools. And we have cooperation with street actress, and she would be like a retro police woman, harassing people where to park and stuff like that. It would be an act, of course, but what we want to achieve is people are quite used to take cars, and to travel by cars, and this upsets them, of course, they're quite upset. But our mission is, there's this parent who's quite upset because on a rainy Monday morning the street changed and he's not able to get with his car through the street. But there's this street theater and so on, and the children sitting behind start to laugh. And because they started to laugh, sooner or later the upset parent starts to laugh too. And at the end of the month, when we'll say, did you like our temporary redesign of the street? The people would be, yeah, it was great. I mean, people laughed, my children laughed, I laughed too, and stuff like that. And that gives the mayor courage to do this in a permanent manner.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting to see how, cultural professionals, artists and so on can also be kind of tool to promote more awareness about these questions. I would like to go on to Tina. Tina, so you work for the Erasmus agency in Slovenia. Erasmus, you all know the program. Erasmus also funds a lot of cultural projects in the field of culture, not only students traveling, but also cooperations between cultural organizations. What I would be interested in hearing you about is also how Erasmus funds mobilities and how it defines green mobilities and how it supports them, what kind of criteria you have in the program regarding these.
Yes, thank you. So as you said, Erasmus Plus is European Union program addressing the field of education, training, youth and sports. So it's a quite broad program, and it covers all the vertical in the education field, from kindergartens to adult education. And we have in the new program, Erasmus Plus, we have 4 main priorities. One is inclusion and diversity, digital transformation, democratic participation, and the most important right now and today is the fighting against climate change and sustainability. So this green is one of the 4 main priorities in the whole program. So the mobility is green mobility is just one part of the priority, We are addressing and promoting this priority as a whole. So you have to think also not just green mobility, but how can you, how can you promote good practices? How, if you can, produce some new methods, how can you address these thematics in a project as a whole? So the green mobility is just one part of the program and of the project you are.
Yeah, so it's as much about the contents of the projects in themselves than it's using green mobilities. Yeah. And what about, so you have specific criteria in the Erasmus program about how the mobility is done?
Yes.
And what are the criteria?
So what is green mobility, as we said? And it's using public transfer, bus, train,
car sharing, carpooling, and important, not electric cars. Using electric car by your own, it's not meant as green mobility. If you are sharing with other people, okay, it's green mobility, but if you are using by yourself, it's not considered as green mobility. So that's one important, maybe also an issue, because at the European level that there is no one consistency and unique rule what is green mobility. So maybe it's one important issue.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to go on to Gabriele. So Gabriele, you work for Culture Action Europe, which is one of the biggest advocacy networks in the cultural sector at European level. What is your position regarding the greening of the sector, and especially regarding mobility?
Thanks, Helena.
That's a very wide question.
Yes.
I mean, I realize
I
now.
have 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, you have,
okay.
Exactly.
Let's try not to multiply them by 5. Thanks for the invitation. And I come from Culture Action Europe. For those who are not familiar with it, it's the major cultural network of cultural networks themselves, organizations, policymakers, activists, and artists. And among our proud members, there is, of course, Motovila, who's hosting us today. And thanks again for the invitation, but also On the Move and the other major networks you might be familiar with. We are based in Brussels, and we work, or at least, I mean, the majority, the core of my own work is liaising with the European Union institutions on everything policy, so from funding for culture to all those other perhaps sectoral or overarching policies like the Green Deal that might affect indeed culture. Believe it or not, this is my first time in Slovenia, so I'm very happy about that also. And disclaimer, I didn't really travel sustainably because I didn't really have a sustainable choice to travel sustainably. It was quite of a pilgrimage also, because it wasn't that self-evident to go directly with a direct flight, and that's our policy. We do not, as an organization, take flights with layover. It was not really a possibility to fly from Brussels to Ljubljana, so it was quite of a stop in any case, a country that is very dear to me, that is Italy. The greening of the culture and creative sector, it is a process, and it is also a political process. Let me just take a step back to 2019, when the European Commission, that, I mean, it's almost going to end its own term in 1 year time. We have elections coming up in June 2024. But back then, the Green Deal was probably the major feature of the EU's political agenda. And the objective of the Green Deal is pioneering, indeed, making Europe as a climate neutral continent by 2050, and as a step towards that, slashing emissions by 55% in comparison to 1990 levels by the end of this decade. And of course, the culture and creative sectors are part of this challenge that in the meantime has been complemented with other challenges, from the pandemic to the Russian war against Ukraine. And I mean, in all those societal challenges, we see how much culture is and shall be more perhaps at the driving seat also politically. It's always interesting to see when these documents, like also the one you mentioned before, the Greening Creative Europe recommendations, they focus on the greening the cultural sector, but they still miss something. It has been echoed already several times today, the role of culture in greening society, so the culturification perhaps of the green policies, and the greening through culture, very concrete examples that were also echoed by Aidan before. And I think the main tagline we normally use is that culture is much more than just a sector of the economy, and not so tiny, but still, in comparison with others, a tiny sector of the economy, contributing, if we want to use GDP indicators, that's what the EU institutions do, to more than 4% to the GDP. But, I mean, let's be honest, it's way more than that. It has way more, it serves way more bigger objectives than that, bringing our societies together. So that's why, and you saw the slide together, Tim showed us the slide of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We refer to sustainability indeed in a more broader concept, in a multiform concept. It goes beyond environmental sustainability. Of course, it's about environmental sustainability, it's about social sustainability, it's about artistic sustainability, sustainability of the artistic practice itself, which is not really sustainable if you look at the way also the public funding is conceived. We need then policy coherence in all that. That's why, I mean, we have two major campaigns at Culture Action Europe, the Cultural Deal for Europe and the Culture 2030 Goal campaign. Let's say that one focuses more on the European level, the other one on the global level. But the main takeaway of both campaigns is indeed that culture needs to be part, and that's why we propose our 18th goal, needs to be part of that slides of the 17 SDG to assert indeed the cultural dimension of sustainable development. I go back to your question, Helena, and of course, culture needs to decarbonize itself, needs to reduce its own carbon footprint, especially if we look at the cultural practices, if we look at how touring can be better or organized or more locally focused, but we cannot just be, and I liked very much the slide before about the sexist boss, we cannot just be environmental, sustainable, forgetting all the other facets of the sustainability paradigm and pattern. That's why, for example, there are two things we very much connect to making, to the possibility of making the culture and creative sectors more sustainable. One is, of course, the cultural budget. It's probably the oldest topic ever, the public budget for culture. We cannot, as cultural organizations, as so tinily funded by the public authorities, cannot be asked to make our own practices more sustainable with the cultural public fundings. I think there is an example, it's the Just Transition Fund of the EU Green Deal, which gives territories, for example, the possibility to make their policies more, their realities more sustainable. We need to be part of those funds. We cannot be simply asked with the tiny little envelope of Creative Europe to serve other objects that are those of legitimate objects of greening Europe. And the other topic is the working conditions in the cultural and creative sectors. It's not just about fair remuneration. It's of course a lot about fair remuneration, but it's about having sustainable working conditions, traveling conditions, sustainable mobility. And I think that, as we see it from Brussels, perhaps, but tell me if if that is a wrong perception, but that is the topic, the sustainability of the sustainability of the culture and creative sector, meaning the working conditions of the culture and creative sector, is what really makes sense as the biggest challenge we have in front of us, but also the opportunity to tackle the issue of making the culture and creative sector more green, their practices more green, but also highlight their contribution to the common cause of greening Europe.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a good summary of everything, all the questions we may have in the sector, and also the need for more budget. I see a lot of calls also at national or local level where these criteria are starting to be introduced, but with no top up regarding money, which I think is also a bit problematic. But so as we discussed, not everyone benefits also the same access to infrastructures. And how can we make sure that the right levels of responsibility also in greening our practices in the cultural sector are addressed, and not risk losing some part of the people, not being discriminating towards some of them. Well, if I go back to Aidan, in your work, part of your work is also on giving advice on policies. And in this aspect, how do you make sure that the right levels of responsibility are addressed and not discriminate certain categories of persons or put too much pressure, as in the cultural sector, for instance, on an already overloaded sector?
Of course, we would start with research. The first step would be quantitative research, how people travel in certain areas, in certain locations, to get the numbers. And the second part would be interviews and focus groups on why people travel as they travel, you know, to see their backgrounds, to see the motives and so on. And with these two approaches, you get quite a clear picture on how big the amount of people that can change their mobility patterns is, you know, because as I said at the beginning, some people for some people it's very easy to change that. For some people it's very difficult, you know. And of course, you first start with the group for which it is quite easy to change the mobility patterns, because often up to some point is just how people are used to travel, you know. So you can always influence that part, but the strategic aim should always be to make the group, the less privileged group, smaller, and that involves investments, of course. On one hand, you have to stop or reduce or severely limit the investment in infrastructure that supports traveling that you don't want. It would be cars, of course, and so on. And on the other hand, you increase the investments and possibilities for more greener modes of travel. That sounds very obvious, that sounds very logical, but if you check the news of today, you will see that on the evening news there will be a report or discussion about widening our highways, which is a giant step in the wrong direction, and I would bet you won't hear much about the potential investments in railways and so on. And that is the answer. It's at the end of the day, it's also a political question on where to target policies and, of course, investments.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, maybe Tina, if we can have the same kind of question to you, but how do you think that the Erasmus program can address also this question about basically taking into account each organization or each person's specificities in this, also in the criteria that you have in the program?
So in Erasmus Plus program, we have different mechanisms. So you will get some extra funds if you choose to travel green. You will get extra funds for travel days, so up to 6 travel days if you choose to green travel. But as I said, one of the priority is also inclusion. So we also have inclusion support for disadvantaged participants. So we can do both hand in hand, so that we cannot, we will not leave anybody out. And also we consider green travel if you take more than 50% of your travel in a green way. So it's not necessary to travel the green 100%, but more than 50% of your journey should be considered green.
So if you live in the north of Sweden or
Yes.
somewhere in a very rural place, you can use the car first and then...
Yes, or
Yeah.
take plane to come to the mainland and then take a train to travel around Europe, inside Europe.
Yes, thank you. And the funding you mentioned, so it's regarding, it funds the mobility, so you give extra funding so
Yes,
that the
yes.
extra costs can be covered?
Yes, yes. It depends on a distance band, and you get different funding. It depends on the distance band, and depends if you choose green travel or normal travel. Yeah.
And also you get some remuneration for those extra days you spend.
Yes, yes.
spend
You
them.
can travel up to 6 days, and you get fund.
And
for
when
that.
you mention inclusion, what do you mean by that? Is it in the regarding questions of mobility?
Also, it's one of the 4 priorities in the program. So it's considered everywhere. You know, if you have some kind of disadvantaged participants, or if it's a thematic, if you tackle this theme, so you also can get, if you have this kind of participants, you can get inclusion support and help them to travel, that we will not exclude anybody.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, also in the Culture Moves Europe program, which is supposed to be the Erasmus for culture, but with a lower budget. So funding mobility in the cultural sector, it's also in the criteria that, you're encouraged to travel greener, but the more you use the train, the more budget you get for this.
Yeah.
And also if you travel with your family or with your kids, or if you're disadvantaged in some ways, then there's some extra funding for this.
And we are trying to pass the message to our applicants and beneficiaries that don't think just on travel. Please think green before, during, and after the mobility. How you prepare to your mobility. Don't print tickets. Use public transportation. Less luggage. And then during the mobility, use, bring with yourself recycled shopping bag, use tap water, shop in second-hand shops, this kind of. And when you come back home, please pass this message, good practices to others, to influence on others. It doesn't cost much, but it can mean a lot.
And also I'm seeing more and more projects now that take into account this mobility. So, for instance, when there's a long travel over a couple of days from, Western Europe to very Eastern Europe, of artists or cultural professionals who try in some way, which is not always easy, but to take advantage of maybe the stops they have in different cities, or basically to use this mobility also not only as a means of transportation, but to take a wider approach to this.
And
wider use of it.
Be an example. We as an organization, we are trying to live those kind of standards, green standards, We are organizing, events on a green location, using local, ecologically produced food. Every time when we plan an event, we are giving some kind of instructions to our participants. Please use public transfer to come to the event. We will use the local produced food. So we are trying to pass this message throughout our daily work to our potential applicants and beneficiaries also. And we have one internal initiative in our company. We are a public body, that we have 1 month initiative that it's called 𝗀𝗲𝗶𝗴 srećo v službo. So it's bring the luck in your work. So we are trying in this 1 month period to come to work as green as possible. So use bike, public transfer, bus, train, car sharing, and we get some small prizes, and it's just one time.
Yeah, raising awareness.
Raising awareness, yes. I think it's let's stop talking and start acting.
Yeah. And Gabriele, what do you think? How can we have this more systemic approach also to the questions? What changes do you think we could or should be done in order to ensure that in the cultural sector these responsibilities are shared between stakeholders, including funders, but also artists, venues, all levels of stakeholders?
I will build upon what Tina was just saying now. I mean, because at the end of the day, the change starts from within ourselves, within our organizations, and from the lower hanging fruits, as was evoked before. Of course, before I was addressing the bigger picture, the policy goals and the way we interact with them, the advocacy pleas we make vis-à-vis the EU political establishment, but at the same time, as cultural networks, and Helena before was referring to the fact that if you work with the international cultural cooperation, of course, your carbon footprint tends to be quite substantial. And as cultural networks, yes, I mean, our carbon footprint also could be diminished. At the same time, there is a value we all need to preserve, and that's the very value of the all-European project. It's a project about tearing down barriers. I mean, I was young, but yesterday when I was crossing the border, I remembered when between Nova Gorica and Gorizia, they took down the barrier on the 1st of May 2004, which was a symbolic move, but I mean, Europe is about connecting us. So at the same time, we need to have in mind that value when sketching out our practices and make them more sustainable. In order to do that, as cultural network ourselves, together with other networks you might be familiar with, I mean, including On the Move, European Music Council, ITM, Trans-Europol's, ELIA, and other colleagues. So we are a group of 16. We are at the moment developing a peer-to-peer learning process, let's call it that way. It's in implementing in our own practices the eco guidelines that were developed by the SHIFT project, funded by the EU. I mean, now it sounds all abstract, but to make very concrete examples, we have identified within our team a green team member that is responsible for implementing and monitoring the implementation of the green policies within our organization. There is, of course, the part about communication and raising awareness, but being even more concrete. I said before, we do not take flights with layover. We tend not to take flights and to prefer more sustainable means of transport, like the train. We use a calculation similar to the ones that was shown before planning our travels and then reporting when we are back. I mean, when I'm back on Thursday, I will report about the CO2 emitted through my travels. Events, we try to take that into account when organizing events, also in terms of the destination that can be easily reached, and the catering. All our caterings are indeed vegetarian, and not only as a show of respect towards vegetarians, but because of the climate responsibility that this choice embodies. And then when it comes to office and home office, for example, unlike the usual policy of Belgium-based business organization that pay as an extra benefit for your car, we as an organization tend to we use the fact that the Belgian federal state gives you the possibility of giving 20% or something like that for each kilometer that you do when commuting to work. So since it's 2 kilometers, my way back and forth, I think I get 40 cents every day, which is indeed a benefit that makes sense more than the corporate car I was referring to. And then there is the whole conversation about Creative Europe, about what our advocacy work vis-à-vis the programs is. Of course, I see a limit when reading the latest policy documents commissioned by the European Commission, so not yet a Commission document, that it focuses solely on the transportation mode, without taking into account all those things that you, Helena, were referred before, for example, what you do while traveling and while traveling in a more sustainable way. And what needs to be upheld there, and it has been echoed very much today about the inclusion, is indeed that we are in any case confronted with a union of 27 member states, and the concrete situations of each and every of those member states tend to differ a lot. 3 years ago, we monitored the funds devoted to culture in the recovery plans of every member state. We had extremely good examples and no examples at all. If we transfer that to how the green policies impact on the cultural sector, we might well see that some Western European states, I take as an example the good practices that about Belgium were referred to before. Some member states can be more, the culture and creative sectors of some member states can be more advantaged than others, or let's say the other way around, there are sectors in some member states that are more disadvantaged. And that's all in all about cultural diversity and about preserving the cultural diversity of our Europe, which at the end of the day is part of the biodiversity. So indeed, advocating for a sustainability concept that takes into account the carbon footprint, the environmental impact, and the social impact on the culture and creative workers, on the culture and creative sector at large will remain, I think, a focus of our advocacy activities for the years to come, and seeing also, I mean, we're already preparing for the new budget. It will only come in 2027, but there is a revision in 2024, which is a good starting point to imagine the future cycle of how EU public funds will be sketched out. But just to summarize, greening the culture and creative sector should not just be another box to tick in your application process, and should not at all be an overburden for already stressed culture and creative sectors. So that's probably the main recommendation for the funders.
Yes, thank you. That's a very, very good one. Also, I think that as a cultural network, and well, there are cultural networks in almost every field at European level. I think you also have an interesting position and maybe a role to play also in raising awareness about these questions to your members, and also about the responsibility that different kinds of members can have in these questions. And of course, the funders, the European institutions, and at national and regional level are very important. I'm looking at Tanya because I know we are over the initially planned time. But do we have time for a few questions? Okay, 10 minutes, thank you. So, do you have any questions? Maybe it would be interesting to hear some experiences back from Slovenian organizations also. How do you feel the situation is here in Slovenia? But I think I saw one hand being raised first from Sweden. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. It's always inspirational. I've been missing one perspective. I mean, everything is important in this discussion, but I'm missing a bit the focus on where is the work status, both for funding bodies, but also when you're working on creating more sustainable infrastructures in the cities for more sustainable transport. Where is the status on working on new measurement and validation of what sustainability means in terms of where you are somewhere in Europe? I mean, to have an indicator for a megacity is quite different from measuring mobility in a sustainable frame in a village somewhere in the forest. So yeah, I'm a bit wondering about these terms of measurements and indicators.
You're thinking about tools to measure carbon footprints depending the mobility use, or
not about the carbon footprints, but can there be other measurements be applied? I can't see that in the European Green Deal at all.
Do you have any reactions to that? I'm not sure the question was fully understood. Is it?
I'm not sure either. I mean,
Measurement other than the CO2.
I see. And how can you apply this this approach to larger cities on one hand and to more rural areas on the other?
No, what I'm wondering is because we are talking very much about reduction of not sustainable mobility, but we are not talking about increasing access to alternative mobility in regions or in structures where you don't have access to this alternative mobility. So then, of course, you also need to take different indicators to value sustainability in, if it's cities, if it's villages, if it's regions, to measure the efforts being done on sustainability if you don't have the same kind of infrastructure. So to reduce the carbon footprint is, of course, a very clear measurement, but you can't measure all of these more qualitative indicators. So is there any discussion or anything that is changing in the guidelines or in,
I mean, I can give a few examples of what our approach is, because we are working in larger cities, although in Slovenia there's not many larger cities, of course, and we also work in quite rural areas. And the thing that is, of course, the starting point is different. You know, if you check the Ljubljana historic city center, much lower amount of people would use car on a daily basis. If you compare it with the outskirts, the amount of people using cars would be higher, of course. And if you compare it to a rural area, of course, it will be higher. No surprise in that. But still, if you check the distances people make with cars locally, still quite a significant share of daily journeys in rural areas would be short, actually, you know. So you can replace part of these journeys by cycling, by walking, and so on. And then you have new means of travel, like electric bike and so on, that make these journeys longer. That's one approach. Of course, as I said, the starting point is quite different, but you can still reduce the amount of people using cars on a daily basis. And the second thing is, what you want to diminish is the people traveling in cars alone. So here you have a bit of a potential, because sometimes some areas they have public transport, sometimes it's very well functioning, but of course you have other cases in which they have a very low frequency of public transport and bike connection and so on. And in case of that, you try to reduce a bit the amount of people traveling in cars alone, and to support or facilitate people traveling together. And of course, you have many ways of doing that. On one hand, you have the usually quite simple web applications that make it quite easy for people to share rides. But on the other hand, you have also a bit more complex approach. For example, the employer rewards people that, or employees that would come to a certain point, I mean, to the location of work together by car if they're from some more remote areas. Did I answer at least partly your question, or was it something else you were looking for?
I've been more looking about a policy level of finding new indicators for sustainability.
Okay.
I don't think we are on the right position. Yeah, we are not the policy makers.
No, but it's true that the overall Green Deal is about, I mean, the very indicator is becoming climate neutral by 2050, and the CO2 is the main indicator. I don't see in the political debate, now going beyond the cultural sector, in the EU political debate, any other indicator than the CO2. I mean, also if you look, I'm now going beyond my own job description, but also if we look at the debate that there was on the 2030 ban on cars, I mean, the CO2 emission of the of the car was the indicator that was employed, and actually is also why there was the overall debate on e-fuel and biofuel. On e-fuel, yes, on biofuel, not, because precisely the CO2 emission there is not equal to zero. But I get your point that in the EU, that is the overall indicator. Perhaps we would need a scientist and a climatologist to tell whether there are other viable indicators to employ. But also, if I see the new European Bauhaus, we have not mentioned it, but the European Commission has made it. It's very much architectural focused, but it has made it its own way to bring the imaginary of the Green Deal to concrete terms, and there is a lot about the infrastructure, the way we are building in the future, and of course also, and I mean, in the Nordic countries we have very interesting examples to quote that, to refer to. Everything has been focused on building CO2 neutral buildings also in the frame of the new European Bauhaus, with the artistic and creative component, which at least in political terms is present in that project.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Yes.
I have a question for Gabriele. You mentioned that you're trying to get culture to be included in the Sustainable Development Goals, is the 18th goal. And I'm just curious if you can elaborate more on that. Like, what is that process? How are you going about it? And what do you think will be the impact of having that as one of the goals specifically?
If you are not at the table, you're on the menu. So we need first visibility as a sector to be on the SDGs. I tend to be optimistic, many tend not, but again, it's a process, and the process started when we failed back a decade ago, when the SDGs were first sketched out with a goal of 2030. And the process didn't stop there, but actually continued. We are part, together with the International Music Council, which is based also in Europe, in Paris. We are the two Europe-based partners of a global coalition of other networks from everywhere in the world, from the Americas to Africa. That is advocating then not in Brussels, not before the institutions, because we do not need to preach to the converted, or perhaps we still need so that they do not forget what is the main request. But we advocate together with this group vis-a-vis the forum there is the United Nations and UNESCO. UNESCO is, of course, an ally, so we need to go beyond UNESCO in a way. UNESCO is an ally, and if we look at the Mondiakult declaration that was adopted last year in Mexico City, last September, I think one year exactly by the date, by the day, that declaration asserts the role of culture as a pillar of sustainable development and endorses the inclusion, the work that has been done on a zero draft goal devoted to culture, which means, of course, it was also mentioned before by Tim, right to culture for the communities, for the local communities, participation, which means democratic participation at the end of the day. And again, the process then we see also in I was just seeing it on my Twitter, or perhaps X feed, I should call it, these days, a few days ago, that also the G20 declaration made a reference to culture, and the G20 declaration adopted on Sunday in New Delhi on culture as a driver of sustainable development. That is a work that is spearheaded by UNESCO, but we as cultural networks, global cultural networks, accompany this process indeed with this campaign, and you can look up for it online. It's Culture 2030 Goal Campaign, which indeed we are among the initiators together with, I forgot to mention, a third partner that is based in Europe, and a very valuable one, which is UCLG, so the United City and Local Government, that is indeed a great advocate of this whole work.
Thank you very much. I think we have to stop now. There's room for the second panel and further interesting conversations. Thank you, all three of you, for your participation and interesting insights to the question.
Thank you.
We continue our International Mobility for Creativity Forum with the second discussion that is sector-orientated. Sector-orientated means it's bottom-up. It will be focused on sustainable and green initiatives and practices that can serve as inspiration in cultural and creative sectors. So we will host representatives of well-known European institutions that think about, promote and put into practice the necessary changes, and let's get to know them. 𝗀𝗽𝗲𝗶 is currently working as a project manager for European Union projects at Progressione. Their approach emphasizes the seamless integration of sustainability within their projects. Please welcome 𝗀𝗽𝗲𝗶. We invite also Birgit Berndt. She's an artistic director for dance at Norrlandsoperan since 2014 and responsible for the artistic program and international collaborations in 𝗀𝗲𝗄, Sweden. She aims to empower especially performance artists based in the Nordic countries and internationally in long-term collaborations, including residencies, mentoring and production support. Please give her applause. We are inviting also Dušan Dovč. He's a curator at the International Center for Graphic Arts in Ljubljana and responsible for coordinating MGLC 𝗀𝗲𝗄𝗏, a creative and residential center. Currently, he is engaged in the Creative Europe supported project aimed at developing a model of sustainable management of residential centers to foster sustainable Arctic practices and enhance career opportunities for artists. Another applause for Dušan. And the panel will be moderated by Gábor Mondik. From 2014, he has been working in the Creative Europe desk of Hungary, and since 2015 as a deputy managing director and head of culture sub-program. Gábor received the Hungarians for Europe award on the Europe Day that is given to people who have a long and outstanding record to promote the European Union and its core values. So, please another applause for Gábor Mondik. I leave the floor to you, and of course we will all enjoy in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. When we were talking about what this panel should be about, we agreed on two things. That it should be very practical, first, and the other one that we agreed on, that we wouldn't like to give you just best practices or good examples, but we would like to a little bit talk about also bad practices, because of course when you experiment, sometimes you meet a dead end, and we thought that this could be also for you. So I will ask the panelists not just to talk about the shiny bright things, but also like a little bit of the challenges that you may have on your respective fields. Just to continue what was the panel before us, in what the panel was talking about, what is sustainability for you? What aspects of sustainability is important for you and why? And you can talk about your projects, your daily routines, anything. So please, let's start with Birgit.
Well, I will jump over the issue to trying to define sustainability. I just try to shed a light on some elements that I find very important that we haven't been talking about until now. One part is capacity building, capacity building already in a very early stage of how you educate both the artists but also cultural workers in the sector in both touring slow, touring sustainability, touring sustainable, but also to think about production resources and places, and also in terms of lifelong learning is a capacity building in the cultural field. It's a crucial point for working sustainable. And then another aspect that I think is extremely important when we talk about sustainability is accessibility. And that's both to which kind of mobility tools can you use? Is it really physical mobility, as we've been talking about traveling? What are we thinking in terms of digital mobility, which is especially crucial in rural areas where you can't travel a lot to meetings and for networking, but also the importance of physical meetings in comparison to digital networking is a huge part of sustainable thinking in implementation phases. Yeah, these two parts. And the third point that I think is crucial for sustainable working in the cultural sector is collaborating in very many perspectives, both to create a market, to create sustainable solutions, both in the production process, but also in the touring and distribution and dissemination process. I can stay there for the beginning.
I would like to add to what you just said, that sharing the best practices is also really good among collaborators or among partners, because then there are many things that you experienced and it can be good or bad. And then if it's bad and already someone tried it, it's good not to try it again, or maybe even come to a common solution to that problem that more people are facing. And regarding the other topic you mentioned about capacity building, Progressione deals a lot with that topic, and with many of the Creative Europe projects that we do, we try to tackle that part, and it's every time we are getting more and more involved in all the sustainability topic, but not only green sustainability as we're talking about, but more about social and economical sustainability as well.
Maybe I can simplify a little bit, because I like to speak in structures and with very simple keywords. For me, being sustainable or sustainability is always connected with a project. So I'm always asking myself, for example, whether the production within the project is sustainable. Is it green? Is it somehow locally oriented? Are the artists aware? What are they doing? Are they polluting the environment? Are they visually polluting with the work they are doing? That's one aspect of being sustainable. Then the other is, as also Birgit said, it's about partnerships and relationships. Are they sustainable, or this is just for one time? Is this just for this project and then we just say goodbye? It was nice to collaborate, or it was not so nice? That's also the question. And the third one, it's infrastructure. And you've mentioned also this knowledge sharing, capacity building. I also like to speak, since we are running a residential house, whether our infrastructure is sustainable, meaning is the accommodation sustainable? Are we friendly enough for the artists that we are hosting? Are we hosting them for the period of time that is also valuable for them, or is just a short visit, for example, a couple of days that neither us as the host, neither the artists that are coming don't get the proper impact? So maybe these few keywords for me are crucial, but I think we are somehow combining each other's message that we want to deliver.
Okay, thank you very much. Going on with the questions. At first, this may sound a very broad question, that what is the role of the cultural sector, and in how to put it, promoting sustainability? Is it the right thing to say, to promote sustainability? Of course, culture, as was told before in the previous panel, could be about storytelling, awareness raising, changing of mindsets. How do you see your role in this? So it's like a very broad question. How do you see your role in this? And And what about your audiences? Because of course it's not just about you, because your projects or as an institutions, you have an audience, and of course you have a large impact on your audiences. So how do you see your role?
I think we are, as also Tim mentioned, with this example about the glass of water in the movie. I think by giving the example, it's one of the main ways. But also, as we were also talking through lunch, is that we have a much higher impact than we think it is. Like each of us have a responsibility and some impact, but we as organizations or as governmental institutions have a higher impact. So we should use that position we have to get to raise awareness and to have a better reach of the message we want to achieve. And in Progressione's situation, I can say that it's not only like our main audience are people from the cultural sectors, being artists, or so it's not the final person or final consumer of culture, but this intermediate person. And it's not only about capacity building and doing workshops and so on, but also, for example, in one of our projects, the Be Green, we are going to camp in tents, and it's very sustainable. It's going to be a challenge because we are also used to some comfort, but it's going to be part of the festival. Other practices that we have, for example, in Most is another project that we are partners in, and it's regarding the Balkan music sector. And there it was very challenging to keep the mobility sustainable. One of our aims of the project was the mobility of artists, musicians mainly, but it was very hard to keep it sustainable because of the infrastructure that it's different than in the Western Europe. So that's something to take into consideration when we are doing policies or guidelines, that not everyone counts, not everyone is on the same level. And we encounter, the trains are not so good, the roads are not so good, and then maybe one musician would have to travel quite a lot to get to their shows while they were touring.
I will step in here, right? I mean, if we were talking about mobility by train, which is a big issue in all of the countries we are representing here, I guess, I think to create visibility also for a lack of sustainability and for a lack of infrastructure is an important point in the projects that we are handling. We've been in a European project called Rail to Dance, which included a 40 days train ride, very sustainable for the artists, but also teaching the artists and the involved cultural workers a lot about the limitations of both the international collaboration between the traffic and transportation systems, but also the challenges of, I mean, all the artists are for ages screaming for long touring, but then if you have a project that is really putting the emphasis on being on the road for a very long time, you're suddenly meeting very new challenges because mobility comes also with a cost due to quality, but also what happens in a collective that is on tour for such a long time. How is the energy changing? But also these incredible chances to meet local audiences and dance communities in a much longer time trajectory. So the touring was had stops of 4 to 5 days in every tour stop. So people from the local artist communities were joining the travel to the next stop. So you could really experience the limitations and also illustrate the challenges and the opportunities of mobility in the creative sector.
Maybe I can step in now, because I'm figuring out, or actually it's pointing out that the artists on residencies are also eager to stay longer period of time. So, for example, we just finished one Creative Europe project in From the Margins, and it was focused on the refugee artists, displaced artists. And as the partnership was the print museums, print studios, we offered them actually good working positions. So they could print their artworks in print studios at partners institutions, as I said. They had very good support by the print technicians of the partners. That was another thing that was very important for them. And they had somehow a feeling of a safe space for them. They were, some of them, also traumatized. They came from Ukraine and these different experiences of their homeland and so on. But at the end of the day, actually now when we are just trying to evaluate the project, we have figured out that they would suggest a longer period, like at least 3 months of residency. Then it should be more clear what is the public program that artists that are refugees at the same time are supposed to offer the local communities, because sometimes they felt more like refugees and less like artists. That was the comment by them as well. And then we would also like to continue, so make this European project sustainable in a way of creating some sort of residential program entitled like Studios of Sanctuary. So our print studios could exchange the artists, but not just the artists, as well the studio technicians to share their knowledge. So this was one project that we just finished. We are now starting with another project that is connecting different art residencies. One is here in Ljubljana, the other 3 are in Athens, Madrid, and Prague. And we would like actually to be more engaged with smaller group of artists. We are speaking just about 8 artists within the project that will travel all around these residential places for 3 months. So it's like career opportunity, better positions for them to work within the residential places. And at the end of the day, we just address them with the topic of sustainability, meaning what do they, how do they actually get this term in a way of visual arts, like do it yourself, do it with others, recycle art, eco art, and so on. And I'm really glad that one of the proposals that was selected was also oriented towards the institutions. How sustainable are we as the project managers, the staff that will be engaged, what are the relations between us, for example, so they will question also the partners themselves. So this was actually what I think it's important. But of course we do have, since we are speaking about green mobility, sometimes cases when you must host a person for a shorter period of time, but that's another mission probably why he's coming. This happens a lot since we're also the producer of Ljubljana Graphic Biennial, but we also here, at least at this edition that's opening on Friday, try to engage the artists to come to Ljubljana for a longer period and to connect with the local artists and really produce something here, not just transfer the artwork.
Okay, as far as I understood, you were all talking about mainly, not just, but mainly about, you know, the project audience, like the artists themselves. But what about, let's put it this way, the general audience? Is it something that you can tackle? I mean, that maybe not the productions should travel, but the audience should travel, something like that. Do you have something to add on this topic?
It's a favorite topic for me, so I really need to say something. I mean, especially when you're walking in more rural areas, I mean, mobility costs and also how to move artists or audience, it's a key question. Our costs for mobility are around 70% of the whole budget. Everything else is like production and costs for artistic fees. So it's really a key question. So it's always a question, should the artist travel or should the audience travel? So we are very often using, pure distance measuring and checking where are the crossroads between different small places to check is it worth to have a travel support for the audience to these smaller places, or will it be necessary to transfer the audiences always to the major cities? So our region is like 1,500 kilometers long. So when we are touring, we are really touring from one place to the other in one day sometimes. That also means that very often we try to organize mobility and shuttles for the audience to very small remote places, but that are geographically much more fortunate. So also to shift the measurements a bit about not creating a center in the center, but also to creating centers in perspective to means of transportation.
In our case, usually in my projects, we don't really work with the final audience, but there is one project in which we do. It's called 𝗲𝗲𝗲𝗶, and it's about taking culture to the rural area. And in this case, we are bringing the performance to the countryside. And it's a part of Hungary. It's a region that it has less infrastructure, and it's a little bit behind other regions in Hungary. So it's a very important opportunity for people living in these villages. And we are involving people living in the villages to work together with us to understand better what are their needs, and in that sense, reach the audience in an easier way. Not bringing something that we think is good, but bringing something the audience is looking forward to, or it's a topic that is engaging them. And then in this project as well, it's very important, this whole topic about how the audience reaches the performances. So there is always a survey when they leave, and one of the questions is, how far did you have to travel to get here, and how did you travel? So in this project, we are dealing with this topic like this.
I mean, I cannot have such a good practice within our institution that besides touring exhibitions, for example, but since we are the public institution located in the capital of Slovenia and dealing with the biennial as a large-scale manifestation, it's really sustainably questionable, and I think the biennials are now in a threshold how to become more green, not just meaning the mobility, for example, but also the production. Maybe in this case, this year, actually, since we are a lot working with the art director is coming from Ghana, so he selected a lot of artists from non-EU countries. It's a different case, but we just try to be as inclusive as possible and host all the artists that were somehow willing or had time to come. So even not just for the opening, maybe for the period of the biennial, but I think the idea that you mentioned, that touring the audiences within the visual art sector, it would be more difficult, but I don't even imagine. Maybe since we work in graphic arts, it's easier to transport the artworks. It's not large-scale installation sometimes, so that's at least, let's say, green mobility of artworks in a way.
Okay, when we were talking in the lunch break, there was one term that Birgit you used, which really caught my attention, because up until now we were talking about, let's say, classical mobility, like physical mobility, but you mentioned the term digital mobility. So what you meant by that, and because you know, for me, mobility is like a physical thing. But of course, during COVID, we learned that, you know, like digital mobility can really take place. So what's your take on this?
I think for many of us who are not based in the big cities, digital mobility has been there before the pandemic, also very present, and also really more like a survival strategy, because the means to invest in mobility are of course also limited, and it's both meant as a competition or as one side of the networking part. So if you start a collaboration, of course, it's always easiest to make a connection face to face. But once you're in a network, to follow up and to to thrive on in the process, then it's quite easy to follow up on in digital meetings and to go on even in a production process. But also when it comes to digital touring, I mean, in the Nordic countries, there is a lot of touring right now going on and development for artificial intelligence, virtual reality, to combine a live experience for the audience, but probably not to let travel the whole cast for a production if it comes to performing arts, which also makes this interesting question relevant. When is an experience, how live does it need to be a special experience for an audience? But both to minimize costs, but also to broaden your horizon about how an encounter and an artistic experience can look like. So it's both in the collaboration process, but also in the artistic, process.
I mean, maybe I just know I'm not so much in favor of digital mobility. It was quite intense during the COVID situation, but we knew why, because of the limited options for being mobile. And there were some artists who could adopt quite well. One of them was a photographer here in Ljubljana, giving the instructions to another photographer in another city how to take photos. So at the end of the day, there was a joint photography exhibition. But that was really very specific. Then maybe the other way, when digital world is in favor of us being more green or sustainable, is when we do have meetings, when we can combine either with hybrid events. We can as well combine these events with some more publicly oriented program, not just about partnerships and so on. But otherwise, I think the artists are still willing to be physically mobile, to come to one different culture and produce something there.
In that sense, I feel a little bit closer to what Dušan is mentioning, that for meetings, it's very useful for keeping the contact because they are usually large or long projects, the ones we have. So it's necessary to keep in contact with the partnership or the artists. So it's a very good tool, but it is a tool. It won't it won't take away the human part. What you were also mentioning, that it's different when you meet someone in person than when you are through a computer. But again, I think in the world we live, it's necessary, and it also helped a lot in the implementation of different projects. And but I think it's more useful for the management part and maybe meetings with the artist, but for the creation part, at least from my experience, the human contact or being on site, it's very much needed.
I mean, we also tried to have during the COVID this kind of, within the one European Creative Europe funded project, the workshop cycle that was at that time digital. And the group of artists, we managed to keep them together, but not with that kind of effect that it would be physical. So now when we will implement the other project, actually we will make a little bit of different way. First with a physical contact of all the participants that will be engaged in the project. It's not going to be a large group, but with the locals then it's bigger. And then when we will continue with these workshops, it will be a possibility of joining them either physically or online, for example, to escape this unnecessary mobility if there are just one-day educational events, for example.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in the most project, there is a good example, because during COVID, the round 1 couldn't meet in person, and the round 2 was last year, and they could meet in person. And you can see like how one of the aims of MOST to create this network around musicians or cultural managers was created, whereas in the round 1 they got a little bit more isolated. And even though it was a good tool to survive during COVID, because they felt that they belonged to a bigger network, you can feel how stronger the relationships got after meeting on site in the on-site training. And you could also see that last weekend. It was the grand finale of the project in 𝗀𝗲𝗃, and it was a very nice experience because it was the first time for round 1 and round 2 to meet. And it was, you see the differences of that.
Okay, So, as Tim put it in his keynote, that I think he said that we are all role models. I mean the film industry and also the cultural sector. And but of course, you cannot do everything. So, what can you do, and what do you feel that is beyond you? So, of course, here again, I would like to emphasize the good and also the bad practices aspects, and I just want to add one maybe provocative question to this question: is sustainability all about the money, or what? So what's your take on this?
Maybe I can tell you a story of one of the partners, Meat Factory in Prague. They have a residential place, and they also had once a resident who was trying to recycle the garbage within the art studio. So it was really very eco-friendly, or let's say with a mission of being an eco-friendly project. But at the end of the day, the creators, I think they said, it's really too smelly. It's not possible to have it here in the building, so we'll have to find another solution. So maybe us, for example, as infrastructure, as residential house, as producers, curators, and so on, I see myself more in a role of mediation between the artists and their inspire or, I don't know, desire what they would like to produce. And I'm noticing that maybe, especially now when we are just before the opening of biennial as a large-scale exhibition, that the artists should be really better prepared. The technical plans, everything they expect from the producer, maybe in the performing arts is a little bit different. Then you can be sustainable, you can be more green. But if everything is on the last day, it's very difficult. So that's one thing that we all try to learn. And then the other thing is maybe also what I found out since I have a lot of contacts with the artists in residencies, for example, that I need to mediate sometimes between one artist who comes for 2 months, for example, and would like to keep his personal rituals as at home, not to adapt a little bit on the infrastructure situation, everything else. So I have also somehow find a way, okay, I know that you need peace at that part of the day, but maybe you can do something else, for example. So, and that's where I think the cultural sector, or at least the support sector, like also Creative Europe Desk and all the mechanisms are, that we try to find a way how everybody win this win-win situation, for example.
I really like to add on this very practical level of and how can we have an impact on the production situation, but also how could we probably avoid these mistakes and how we create an infrastructure in a place. Or I mean, we haven't been talking about forced mobility, which is usually a big part of the sustainability issue, because I mean, there's really no lack of places for residencies all over Europe. So it's very easy as an artist actually to get around from residency to residency. But many artists, if you ask them, they would really prefer to stay longer in the same place, to have longer residences, really to have the possibility also to work with local communities. So that is also one thing that very often we refer to. We can't change the infrastructure because it's on a policy and it's on a political level, but still we are in a lot of collaboration, so we can avoid splitting up the production slots, so we could put the residences together in longer production times, and we could also try to avoid unnecessary traveling by really minimizing from 5 residences towards 2 or 3, and also to promote and to be active in the lobby work for production centers that make also possible for people in a region to walk on their home base without leaving their families, because that's also a big issue that's coming with the mobility and the sustainability, that artists are forced to leave their families for a longer time.
And another thing I find interesting in this sense, also related a little bit with money when we're talking about mobility, is that if we can make processes easier and more simple, then I think people will be more willing to take those options rather than just take the plane. Because, for example, again, it was very recent, many things happened, so I have a lot of examples. But a cultural manager that was invited to come to the festival, they were coming from Serbia, but in order to have like the refund of coming by car and coming more people by car, it was so complicated. And he was meanwhile in another festival, so it was hard to organize all that. And for him, it was much easier to buy, in the end, flight ticket rather than do all this paperwork about what is the engine size of your car, questions that when you open the form might scare you, and then you rather close it and buy the ticket, which is something that you are already used to. And I think it was Tim who mentioned today about the 𝗀𝗲𝗲𝗶 example, that if you make it harder to get like the easiest option or whatever you want, you make it harder, then people will be forced to use these more sustainable practices. But yeah, that's regarding money and regarding mobility and practicity, I think.
Okay, so I promised you at the beginning that we will be very practical. So again, can you share really general tips and trips that anybody who is here or following us on YouTube could take home? You know, like really general ones, which doesn't matter if you are in the performing arts or in the visual arts. Are there really such tips and trips? Can you share some with us? Or these are more like sector specific or geographical area specific? And also first go with the general ones and after that with the very specific ones.
I have one very, very general that is like a basic rule for every collaboration that should be sustainable. It's to set quite a high baseline on how many collaborators you'd like to involve in a project, because as more collaborators you involve in a project that are coming with a diversity of expertise, you secure both the production process, but you secure a longer lifespan of the work. So if you are working with collaborators in different countries, you build a foundation for international touring. If you aim to present your work more in a regional context, watch out for regional collaborators. So really to bring already the potential collaborators on the table in the implementation and production phase, and not after you already have a finalized artwork or project. So that's just a basic thing. And then I would really love to encourage everybody, if you think international, not to think always international like whole Europe. I mean, watch out for what are the most sustainable touring and distribution channels you have. Or you're talking about a geographic region, as I mean, for us that would be like the Berndt region. So we have a lot of collaboration between Finland, Norway, even Russia sometimes. And so, I mean, to look into your geographical region, not always to reach out for the wide international perspective, to think more regional.
from my perspective. I can give some tips from the management perspective. And it would be many of the things we already mentioned through the time we've been talking or speaking to each other. But I think one is the digital documentation that it's very good, but we're tending to record everything, and maybe we should think if we really need that session or that meeting to be recorded, or is it enough to have a memo? Because you have higher chances that the people will read the memo and less that they will rewatch this recorded version. And so I'm not saying not to use it, just to think if we really need it, if it's useful for documentation sources, or if it's enough a memo. Same as with streaming. Streaming also has a higher or a bigger impact. So if our aim is to reach a wider audience, then it's a good tool. But just to use it because now it got trendy and we're using all the time, I mean, I think it's worth to have a thought. Because a memo occupies much less space in the cloud and it's less energy. And maybe another one, it's not only for residencies, but also for partner meetings or when you're part of a project. I think extended stays are more useful, because then you can think your project, like you can put more things in one bunch, and then you can meet once and have a partner meeting and have a performance of your project or whatever your project is about, but combining different tasks in one travel. So you are making your travel experience more with a bigger purpose, and then your impact will be better justified.
Maybe I would say, out of my practice, for example, because we are both in a position of applying for the funds, like within the Creative Europe program or national or municipality funds, and then giving the residencies as opportunities for a 2-month or longer period. So I have noticed that, for example, some of the artists, when they're applying for the residential programs, are very detailed, very concrete. They make a big research of the community they will come to, and these were the best either applications and then at the end also projects. So it's possible that the artists are not always hiding behind this open work method of artistic process. Sometimes it's really not sustainable, as I said, very expensive. Time management is horrible because they are somehow still not properly knowing what they will do. But not that I would like to censor or limit the artistic process creation. I like it that it's open, but at a certain point, there should be a little bit more concrete. And I think that a lot of open course applications are now willing to get this kind of informations. So, and as I said, when I read this kind of thing, I know that it's possible. It's not that, no, we will think on the spot what we will do, for example. And maybe then also less is more. I really like when the projects are more oriented towards the smaller community or group of artists, or are addressing a specific target group or target audience, because then you know what kind of tools you have to use and you are not exaggerating in a way what you would like to deliver at the end of the day. And it's also the decision, because maybe we didn't tackle it, since I worked in an NGO and I'm working in a public institution, it's also the question of being sustainable on this legal or organizational form of institution. Sometimes the public institutions are more rigid, they're not so flexible, we cannot be so dynamic. On the other side, for example, there is more flexibility.
Yeah, actually you're a little bit run faster than I expected. So that would be my, the other aspect, the very specific ones. And I mean specific for like, even in different parts of Europe, let's say there are different realities and different challenges. And also we should tackle this question that of course, geographical specificities also, you were talking a lot about this, but also like this legal or let's say administrative matters. So what challenges do you see? These ones or anything else that you would like to mention, and what solutions do you see?
Well, I think when I was mentioning in this report that they need to fill in to get back the money of coming by car when they can justify that they are coming more, and it's more direct than doing a layover in Vienna to come to. So it's like going like this in order just to come like this. That's I think that's a system problem that we are. In one sense, our message is be sustainable, but then we are like, okay, sit down and fill this in, where these people usually are like having multiple hats and doing different kinds of jobs at the same time. They don't have an assistant or someone who could fill that in while they are doing other jobs. So I think the lack of time and the difficulty of this paperwork, sometimes it doesn't help to be sustainable. And then I think that's something that can be changed. Maybe not so easy, but it's something doable.
I'm also wondering a bit when it comes not only to issues of mobility, but also of cultural diversity. I mean, in the north of Europe, we have a rich Sami culture spanning over 4 to 5 countries, and they're very rarely supported only by the national governments, not even acknowledged as a minority very often. So there's also a question of the responsibility both for the public institution, but also the private organizations to work on giving space and visibility to artists that are not part of the acknowledged professional arts field. So we're a lot talking about, and when we're talking about performing arts and it comes to dance, if we're talking about the hip-hop artists, or if we are talking about the indigenous artists, a lot of the funding systems are based on that you need to succeed education in the country you're applying for funding. So that is also an issue that when it comes to sustainability, to work on the capacity building for artists that are more connected to the civil society, but not to the professional arts field in our definition.
But maybe when we were having this in From the Margins, a big panel discussion in Edinburgh, it was also the same situation as you are now mentioning. The Irish group of travelers, or these more self-organized groups of people, and then they entered into the public space through the culture, through the art projects. But at the end of the day, their message was also, it's nice that we are speaking now about being displaced artists, don't have proper conditions for work and so on, but it all remains in this bubble of culture and arts. So it has to step further into, I don't know, newspapers, to other discourses, not just within our art communities. But it's maybe that's also the mission of us, not just to mediate among ourselves what we are doing, what we intend to change, human behavior or whatever, but also to step a little bit further from art.
Yeah, and maybe like then there are other challenges that escape the cultural sector. I mean, if you need to improve the road infrastructure of a region like the Balkans, then it's something that the cultural sector experiences. But then again, I don't think they can do anything to improve the roads. So I think then it's again politics, and there are other things involved in the equation.
Okay, we were talking about before the panel. We were talking about a lot of things during lunch break, and of course now during the panel. Do you feel that we should tackle something that was left out now during our discussion in the past almost an hour, that you would like to mention? What's missing from this panel? Is there anything?
I think there's something that we touched very roughly, but we were not really giving some examples for that. And we're very often talking about how can we make touring more sustainable and working with international touring, but with smaller teams involving local communities. And so I just want to mention a production that has been hosted here in 𝗀𝗲𝗲 a couple of years ago. Portuguese choreographer André Urber. I think Katja has been part of the 𝗀𝗽𝗲𝗲𝗰 festival. Displayed presented at the 𝗀𝗽𝗲𝗲𝗃 Theatre. It's a choreographer who's only traveling with himself plus one Slovenian technician and stage manager. And then they work with around 10 to 15 local dancers that who not even need to be employed. And it's a kind of installation, performance, choreography, very beautiful. It's called Burn Time. So it's a super nice example for how you can reduce the team that is traveling with artistic concept and even creating value in sharing artistic practice, but also by having a workshop of 3, 4, 5 days building up on the production on every tour stop. From scratch, you can really create even a value for the local communities after the performance or the team is already gone. So just as an example for how that could look like.
Maybe something that we didn't get the chance to talk because this panel is more related to mobility, but that we've also talked, and for me at least is quite important, is not only sustainability of mobility, but in general sustainability, as Dušan was also mentioning, the sustainability of the project. Again, for example, most, I think it was the seed that was created in a lot of cultural actors. And I think that's the most valuable result of the project, that it's not only that it was a nice 4 years project and people managed to either tour, go to different festivals, or actually do festivals or workshops in their cities, but that they, for the first time, they got the opportunity to network in the Balkans, because after Yugoslavia was split, they didn't really relate it anymore. They are not, they don't collaborate so much. They rather collaborate with Western Europe. And it was very nice to see how new relationships are being created through Albania and Montenegro or Serbia, and how this is the beginning of a longer journey. And I think that's also sustainability, how the project is going further from just the project, but reaching not only more audience, but relationships, and also the kind of jobs that they could offer to people working in the local places where they did these projects. So yes, sustainability is quite wide, and we couldn't touch all the topics, but I just thought that briefly I mentioned that.
Maybe I would just add that we can also speak about the sustainability of knowledge, expertise, and experiences, for example. And with that, connect this with the mobility, you easily get very, pragmatic questions coming from the field, how to get a visa, how to invite the artists from beyond the European Union. So that's why I think it's very important that this support system is also developing such tools as mobility info points. I think we will hear a little bit later a lot about that, because the experience that we are now facing with the biennial is that we had a great support from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when we were getting the visas from people coming from non-EU countries. But if that would be accumulated in one spot, for example, and openly shared, that would be easier for the whole cultural sector.
So, thank you very much. And I think it's time for questions. So, if you have any questions, please ask our very, very experienced panel members.
You can also share your practices.
Yes, of course, you can share also your practices. Or if you feel that anything that was left out, just comment.
Monitoring your footprint, so to say? Are you collecting any any kind of information? You mentioned that you are asking some participants, on how they traveled and what was the distance. So this is one question, and the other is whether you are noticing that recently there are changes in the funding mechanisms being on local, national, international level in terms of what Tim commented that they don't do. They don't financially reward if you are more sustainable because they find this is something natural that should be included in project design. But yeah, I'm interested in more mainly maybe the Swedish case, if you notice anything like this or a trend. Yeah, thanks.
First question, yes, we are monitoring all travels and we are compensating as well because we're traveling a lot and even flying. And second question, I think what's happening right now in the Nordic countries and especially in the Nordic touring networks is that there's a really great investment in to work on the criteria for a selection of who do you tour, and so there's a very clear priority on touring without any technical transports when it comes to performing arts. There's also a clear priority on touring productions inside the countries only by train, as long as there is a train or public transport. So it's a selection criteria. And yeah, and that's only due to the last 2-3 years. So it is rewarded, and you can also see it in the funding system. As now, I can only answer for Sweden. You need to report on sustainability, and you need to have a strategy for mobility and for touring impact.
In our case, we do monitor it, but we don't do, and we suggest or highly recommend to use other means of transport rather than planes. We don't do for each person who is traveling the carbon footprint number. So we don't do it in that level because it's not so easy to calculate. I mean, you can just calculate for that, but you have to include many other data in it. And regarding the other question, in Hungary, as far as I know, it's not really asked. It's good that you put that you are working with sustainable methods and you are taking care of it, but you don't really get any compensation, or maybe it looks better on your application because you fulfill some of the priorities that they have, but it doesn't really. I think it's closer to what Tim's experience was mentioning rather than Birgit's.
I mean, we don't do, as you said, the monitor in the carbon footprint aspect, but as we prepare the reports after these kind of big events, we always figure out how much money was, for example, invested into the mobilities, accommodation towards the production. That's already a little bit of some sort of indicator whether we were or not green, sustainable, and so on. But considering the funding mechanisms, I do think, as I'm not so much engaged now in the fundraising, but I think it should be more focused on the on sustainable aspects of the projects. Mainly, for example, when the artists are producing something or being abroad, like on residences and so on, what they will bring to their own countries, how they were transferred the knowledge and the expertise they had. So I think it was a little bit, as I know, the mechanisms were supporting or somehow were more focused on the interregional collaboration, co-production, and so on. Now this sustainable matter should be also more visible and important.
Okay, please.
Thanks. There is one aspect, and my colleague from UNESCO in Austria, and also on the MIP meeting in Tunis, where I haven't been, have organized also meetings and conferences on mobility, more on this scary question about global north and global south. And that's my remark. That was not much in our mind today. And we in our discussions were scared that the gap, even after COVID, became bigger, and also it becomes more a norm not to invite people from the global south for different reasons, for financial reasons, for risk reasons, for visa reasons, and also for green mobility reasons, which they reflect themselves. And my question to you is, what are your experiences in your practice with this topic?
In our case, most of our projects are European-based, so it's the mobility is quite easier because it's inside Europe. There is one project, though, where we are working with an African country. I don't lead that project, so I'm not so related, but I know that in that sense, even though the travel it's not so green, the importance of having those artists are making it up for that impact, because they are the topic are discussing about slavery. They are co-working together, and they were a crucial part of the project. So in that case, even though we have to face visa issues or more expensive flights and a higher impact, it was justified because of all the positive side that these people are bringing. And at the end of the day, I think it's like whatever we do, we are going to have an impact. I think what we have to think is whether that impact is worth what we are having, and how to find the balance among those, not to exclude them, but or not to exclude anyone, but to see if it's really meaningful. That's in our experience.
Maybe I can speak out of the biennial that we are now opening. It's focused on the legacy of the non-aligned countries. Yugoslavia is part of that, so also a lot of African countries, India and so on, are included, including the artists that are coming to Ljubljana. And then what's interesting is that a lot of art projects are dealing with archives, with this legacy from the history, and also tracing the mobilities that already occurred and then been somehow interrupted, and now are just maybe another creative impulse for engage the artists to be more mobile, to work more together. So this will be one of the options. But as I said, we try to be as inclusive as we were able. Also, thank God the funding was secured and so on. Otherwise, as I said, the message also could be to the decision makers of European programs to be also more in favor of mobilities beyond the European Union countries, and invite the artists from, as you said, from the global south, for example. Yeah, so-called, yeah.
But I think it's also, I can confirm it's really a big challenge, but there's also something very positive happening there. Because, I mean, if I think back like 5 years ago, it was much more common that you could see a performance from Brazil or from somewhere in an African country has been touring to only 2 places in Europe. You don't see that that much more right now, because everybody is affected by the limited funding. So you're really forced to plan and collaborate more sustainable if you want to invite these artists. So I think it's also something good happening out of this situation for the sustainability.
And regarding that, what I've seen in other partners that we work together with is that they try to tour them. So if they invite someone, and I got reminded because usually they are artists from Brazil, and then they invite these Brazilian artists, and when they come here to Europe, they try to tour them around Europe, and it's not only for one show and then they go back, but like they are touring, and then that makes that trip or that impact less impactful.
Okay, so thank you very much to this very enthusiastic panel. I'm guessing we could talk about this topic for like hours and hours more, but now we have to go with our program. So thank you very much, and enjoy the program. And thank you as well.
And of course, thank you, Júlia, Mihályfy, Birgit, Berndt, Dušan, Dovč, and moderator Mondik, Gábor, for your practical discussion during the panel. It was really interesting to hear all the examples, all the tips and tricks, and of course experiences that you presented. We will conclude the forum with a final takeaway by Jana Wilcoxen. As a regular collaborator of Motovila, she brings an outside eye that is capable of zooming in on the details, as well as taking in and reflecting on the big picture. At the Mobility for Creativity Conference 2019, she reflected on how can we be more aware of what we are doing and the impact that our choices make on the society and environment, as well as our own personal health and well-being. And in 2023, this topic is more important than ever. So please welcome Jana Wilcoxen.
Okay. So at the start of today's event, Ms. Sonja Kralj reminded us of the values of mobility and culture, a practice for centuries that has not only contributed to cultural development, artistic creativity, and innovation among artists and creators, but also expanded our horizons, fostered respect for diversity, and encouraged an open view of the world. She affirms the Slovenian Ministry of Culture's commitment to mobility through its artists and residency programs and cultural fund that supports Slovenian diplomats and consuls so that there can be even another level of mobility among artists and on the more organizational level. With both of these programs being revised and upgraded in the last year. She warns, however, of the threats to mobility, which we heard about from many of our guests today, and they take many forms, from bureaucratic, legal, and taxation issues, limited infrastructure, and vulnerability to challenges such as pandemics and extreme weather disasters and natural catastrophes. She reminds us that democracy without art cannot exist, and without mobility, art and culture cannot exist. So the goal that we face in our sector is how to create fair and sustainable mobility and do the work that we want to do. The how of that at the Ministry of Culture is being also explored through European and intergovernmental working groups addressing the green transition and inclusion and in dialogue with the sector. And that dialogue is really key. So this event today is one such dialogue event, we could say. Mateja Lazar tells us that the culture has a key role in changing society's practices around mobility. And in 2019, at the first such forum that Motovila hosted, we spoke a lot about slow mobility. And we could hardly imagine that less than a year later, we'd be confronted with the reality of non-mobility with the COVID-19 pandemic. And that actually showed us that when we're forced to, we can adapt really easily and we can develop. We had all these tools already available, but in a very quick time, we were able to shift. So it's like when push comes to shove, we can find new ways to innovate. And part of what Motovila seeks to do is to encourage cultural organizations to think green and also realize that it is a challenge that shouldn't be placed on the overburdened sector as just another problem to solve with limited budgets, limited infrastructure, various possibilities of rural and remote areas. So again, with green mobility, it starts in our own organizations, in our own backyard, with our own everyday practices. And yet, cultural funding for it shouldn't stigmatize those who don't have access. We have to remember it is a process of becoming more green and must be integrated within national and international policies and with cross-cultural and cross-sectoral, participation and support. So I'm just reminding, because I know some people came maybe a little later, didn't hear these introductory speeches, and some of our audience didn't get to hear them because they were in Slovenian. So I wanted to go more into those. And I know we all very much appreciated Tim's keynote, because he gave us a lot of very useful and hands-on overview of how he works in the film sector, film and audiovisual sector, and how he likens the creation and implementation of sustainable practices to making mayonnaise, which may sound a bit odd, but for the successful emulsion, you need the right ingredients, in the right amounts, prepared following a specific procedure, and a little luck. And he says for sustainability to work, we also need the kind of right ingredients, right amounts, a little bit of luck, and prepared in a very specific procedure. But that procedure is specific to each organization as well. And that is, I think, key to understanding how we might address green mobility, sustainable mobility, because it is something that is at the same time very individual, very specific to each organization, to each cultural practice, each sector, but we also have a reliance on a larger infrastructure, on systematic needs, on funding opportunities. So it's always a very specific dialogue back and forth among these two realms, or these layered realms. So what I appreciated about Tim's approach is that as sustainability officer at the Vlaams Audiovisueel Funds, he works with film producers where they are, using the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for defining their scope. And as we heard Gabriele spoke about on the first panel, culture is a very big part of a lobby right now, the Culture 2030 goal document, and is worth reading and following up why culture is so important to be included in these sustainable development goals. Tim also reminds us that being hyper-sustainable at home doesn't compare to what we can do at work, and what we can do in our professional environments. As we said, as we are in a position working in the field of culture to be role models and to create a zgled for other people. Slovenian word, sorry, English word just escaped me right now. So, walking us through his value chain, we looked at the importance of school training and education, the importance of storytelling, how we can do the absence of product placement to also send a message, the importance of money, and the when, where, and how we do things. Going further, he showed with us several different calculators that he uses with film teams, or examples of calculators created for audiences to understand their carbon footprint and travel more easily, for example, to festivals or be a part of international large events. Much of the discussion later on in the panels revolved around values and how to maintain the qualitative aspects of mobility while transitioning to greener and more sustainable practices. So, I ask you this: how might we develop a calculator for ourselves in our sector as we try to incorporate these practices into our cultural projects, our artist organizations, our own practices as audience members or as individuals, as parents, etc.? what might be the message we could send to policymakers in creating this type of a calculator. And this is where my presentation gets a little more experimental. I hope you can come with me on a little bit of a creative mind stretch. So I've been thinking, I woke up this morning thinking about what is the formula? Like when we talk about sustainability and mobility, there are so many different hats that we wear. There are so many variables. And I thought, okay, this is like a formula. It's like algebra. You know, it's like, okay, x times x squared divided by y is da-da-da. And I said, okay, how can we switch, kind of turn this into a little handy calculation that we could remember when we're working on a project, kind of like a guide. And so I don't have it written down exactly. I'm still experimenting with it. But I think it's important that we look at some of the key documents. One being the new study on green mobility in the Creative Europe program. So we could look at that. We could look at the Green European Deal. And we can look at the Culture 2030 goal document. Those are at least 3 that we can start with. So we have 3 doc. And then we could add to that the 17+1 Sustainable Development Goals. So that can be another reference for us. And then we might multiply that by a kind of short list. I know I'm doing analog today, but I had to because I needed to write. That the short list of maybe some of the key words that I've gleaned from the conversations. So sustainability goes beyond green. It includes diversity and social inclusion. There should be a funding compensation for choosing green mobility because mobility costs and green mobility costs more out of pocket, even though we expect the long-term effects to be more positive and worth the investment. We have 27 member states, which equals 27 times X different needs and realities. We need to be concerned with accessibility, so looking at the bureaucratic, infrastructural, and also understanding the dichotomies between center and periphery, global north, global south, young, old, access, non-access, yeah, rural, and city. We need to create visibility and rebrand sustainable practices as cool, green mobility as hip, and we can use humor and play to help us accept new ideas and become more flexible in our mindset. We need to monitor and consider also energy, waste and materials, catering, digital impact that we use in our projects. And digital we can see as a plus and minus. It's not a panacea. It has its own costs, but it can be a very important survival strategy and tool for helping us to connect and collaborate and provide a new form of an extra form of mobility. We need flexibility. We need to make conscious decisions, collaborate, build capacity, be role models, follow up and evaluate where we've been and learn from our successes and our failures and spread the word. So that's all the kind of maybe a checklist. We can refine that later, as I will probably do when I write this all down for publication. But what's important is there's a multiplier here, and that is you. And that you has 27 to the X potential because there are so many different meanings of you, us as individuals, and you as your project, you as your cultural organization. And that's where the creativity and the innovation comes in. And then hopefully this kind of a look on this can lead to green mobility, sustainable mobility, and a brighter future. So that's where I'm going to leave it here today.
So thank you, Jana Wilcoxon, for your conclusion at Mobility for Creativity Forum. And that brought us to the end of the official program. So we would like to thank to all our guests, all our listeners, and of course to all our viewers online. And for all of us present here at 𝗀𝗻𝗃𝗲𝗃, touring artists from Germany will present mobility information points. Mobility information points tackle with the administrative challenges that artists and cultural workers may face when working across borders. And besides, Motovila has something for you to help to biodiversity. And once again, thank you for your time. And of course, keep following Motovila's work and enjoy the rest of the day.